told.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, it is now time for another 3 hours of the most disruptive show in those divided states. In the politically independent corner, I am your investigative political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, ever vigilant, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. First up, we have headlines. After that, we're going into Jamarl's monologue. And then in about 15 minutes, we're going to be taking calls. So you can call in if you'd like to, 202-521-1320. But first, the headlines. President Trump and Joe Biden will debate tonight in Cleveland in the first of 3 such debates occurring within the next few weeks. The candidates will be discussing the coronavirus, the economy, the Supreme Court, and election integrity. Not on the list of topics, Black Lives Matter, foreign policy, and climate change. Moderator Chris Wallace has said he will not be fact-checking the candidates' answers. That is standard for these debates. The debate, by the way, will begin at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. More than 1 million deaths have now been attributed to the coronavirus in the worst yet grim milestone globally. The World Bank, by the way, has also warned that developing countries in East Asia and the Pacific will likely see poverty rise for the first time in 20 years, with 5 million people likely to fall back into poverty due to measures used to contain the coronavirus outbreak. House Democrats have released a new $2.2 trillion coronavirus relief bill. That's a trimmed-down version of a $3.4 trillion bill that passed the House in May. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has said that the new bill reflects what she calls Democrats' willingness to work with Republicans on a coronavirus relief package. The new bill includes money for the Paycheck Protection Program for providing loans to small businesses, funds for state and local governments, and another round of direct payments to individuals. The bill would also revive weekly federal unemployment benefits, which expired at the end of July. California Governor Gavin Newsom has declared emergencies for 3 counties due to the rapid growth of 2 fires: the Glass Fire, which has consumed 56 square miles since Sunday, and the Zog Fire in Northern California, which has burned over 48 square miles so far. The National Weather Service says Northern California continues to see excessive heat today. Police departments in several cities reported 911 outages in their emergency call systems on Monday. It's still unclear what caused the disruptions, which have resolved. Some outages were for a few minutes, while some lasted for up to half an hour. Departments in Arizona, Colorado, and Minnesota reported the issue. The human rights group Amnesty International has said that it's been forced to suspend its work in India after saying it has faced reprisals from the Indian government and frozen bank accounts there. In 2016, the Indian government accused Amnesty International of sedition and has said that it's been investigating the organization for breaking foreign funding laws. Fighting has continued for a 3rd night between Armenian and Azerbaijani forces over the disputed region of Nagorno-Karabakh. The UN Security Council plans to convene later today in order to address the ongoing clashes. Turkey, meanwhile, has today said that it is ready to support Azerbaijan in both its negotiations and combat with Armenia, and The Guardian has reported that Turkey is hiring rebels from Syria to fight for Azerbaijan in its conflict with Armenia. Azerbaijan has claimed that Armenian forces have lost 550 servicemen. Armenia, however, has reported only several dozen casualties and has said that Azerbaijan has lost hundreds so far. You're all caught up. That is the news. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, Jamarl, what's your priority for today? What are you going to be talking about?
So today, I want to have a conversation, 2 conversations. One was something that went on yesterday. Yesterday in the headline, we noted that Donald Trump had commented or hadn't commented on the New York Times piece. I want to apologize for that. Trump did respond yesterday. Let's hear a clip of his response.
There's a New York Times story that came out about an hour ago that says that when you came to the White House, you were paying about $750 a year in federal income tax. They are not releasing that. They're not publishing the tax returns. They're not showing that out there. They're saying to protect their sources. In your tax return, sir, does that sound right that you were paying a couple $100 a year in federal income taxes?
It's fake news. It's totally fake news. Made up, fake. We went through the same stories. You could have asked me the same questions 4 years ago. I had to litigate this and talk about it. Totally fake news. No, actually, I paid tax. And you'll see that as soon as my tax returns. It's under audit. They've been under audit for a long time. The IRS does not treat me well. They treat me like the Tea Party, like they treated the Tea Party. They don't treat me well. They treat me very badly. You have people in the IRS, they treat me very, very badly, but they're under audit. And when they're not, I would be proud to show it, but that's just fake news. The New York Times tried it, the same thing. They want to create a little bit of a story, they're doing anything they can. Not only that's the least of it. I mean, the stories that I read are so fake. They're so phony.
Did they tell you this was going to come out today?
No, I didn't know anything about it.
So Donald Trump did respond, and basically he said it was all fake news. Doesn't exist, not real, and that I'll bring my tax returns out when you get the chance. Now, if Trump loses the election, there is no impetus for him to bring those returns out. If he wins, there's no impetus for him to bring those returns out. So that's where we are. Now, this will come up in the debate tonight, whether or not it could be weaponized, perhaps. I mean, after all, it came out a day before the debate, so I would imagine that it came out for reasons. Either way, this is something he's going to have to answer for in the debate, and something that he may have to answer for whether he wins or loses the election in regards to the amount of debt that is going to come due. But I want to go to something else that's a bee in my bonnet, to put it mildly. So yesterday, and not yesterday, but RGB, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, is no more. She's passed. And with her passing, the Supreme Court would decidedly turn hard right, with everything from Obamacare to Roe v. Wade, and even the election itself, potentially, in the crosshairs, especially if she doesn't recuse herself, and it ends up being a 4-4 split. Now, libs are not happy with this. Oh, they are angry and lashing out on Twitter and social media. This person is at fault. That person is at fault. And oddly enough, libs never actually come to the conclusion that they themselves failed, or that the fault entirely belongs to them. One pugnacious, radically smug lib, Bill Maher, who never let reality get in the way of a bad joke. Let's hear Bill Maher's appalling and outright disgusting commentary, where he blames, of course, Jill Stein.
The Supreme Court hears oral arguments to overturn Obamacare on November 10th. Once this new justice is seated, Obamacare is likely gone. And after that, Roe versus Wade. So I hope you enjoy carrying your rape baby to term. You can name it Jill Stein.
That's disgusting. That's disgusting on so many counts. And, of course, the blame is always somebody else. It wasn't, Obama being too cool for school to get Merrick Garland in. No, it wasn't that. It wasn't him not taking Herculean effort, but using Merrick Garland as this kind of showpiece to try to get people to vote for Clinton. No, let's not blame Clinton and the emails that she was hiding. I mean, the woman was running under a criminal investigation for months, if not over a year. Let's not blame the cheating of Sanders. Let's not blame the slush fund that was the Clinton Global Initiative. Let's not blame the fact that Hillary Clinton was the most hated candidate in the history of candidates, with the exception of Donald Trump. Let's not even blame the fact that Clinton used Trump as a Pied Piper candidate, or that she had $1 billion, over $1 billion, if I'm not mistaken, $1.3 billion. Call it a bribe, call it a gift, whatever you want to call it, $1.3 billion to run a campaign against a reality show host, a man who got his kicks off of firing has-been celebrities. And to make it that much more embarrassing, and to put it that much more in context, we now find out that Trump most likely didn't even want to win the race. She lost to a man that was running a race entirely to prop up his business. And on top of that, Trump failed at pretty much everything he's done, and yet the one thing that he could do is beat the stuffing out of Hillary Clinton. They like to run around and scream about the 3 million more votes. I hate to tell you this, those 3 million more votes were in California. If you look at the rest of the country, she got whooped. She got whooped. Let's not blame the fact that it is reasonable, if you are a candidate, that your job is to go out. What does the public need? What does the public want? And I am going to offer the public what they need and want to get their votes. Now, if you're not doing that, I don't know what else you're doing. The reality of it is, the Democratic Party has used cowardice and fear, be it African Americans, be it Hispanics, be it lefties, as their way of getting in office. And they're doing the same thing again. The Democratic Party had every ability in the world to appropriate the policies back in 2016 that Sanders was running with because those policies were popular, even back then. And if you look at it, they're doing the same thing now. Instead of dealing with the real material concerns of the public that would organically bring people to your cause, that would organically bring people and say, yes, I'm excited about this because that person is pushing for Medicare for all, or that person is pushing for some college loan thing, or that person is pushing to get rid of marijuana to make it legal. That person is doing things that is giving me jizzed up. And in getting me hyped up, I'm going to go out and put that vote for that person. I don't care if that was an alien attack. I don't care if I'm running with the American flag in the background, bleeding with my last breath, placing that vote. Why? Because the person is doing something that energizes me, that I'm concerned and I care about. There's a difference in running that way as opposed to running in the way where you tell people you have nowhere else to go or vote for the other guy. Or you just assume that their vote is yours. That's ludicrous. And it's a warped perspective, if I'm being honest. Represent our interests, you get our votes. It's very simple, very straightforward. In the same mistakes that Clinton did, believing that the country owed her the presidency, Joe Biden is making similar mistakes. Now, Joe Biden may win this race because Trump is pretty atrocious in regards to what he's been doing. There are 200,000 people that are dead in this country. You do have floods on one end and fires on the other. You do have 30 million people out of a job. You do have people being evicted and thrown out of their homes. You do have chaos in the streets and everything else. So Biden may win this, not as a result of anything that Biden is doing more so, but as a result of who Donald Trump is. But even that's a maybe. And even that should give you pause and concern, that a president could fail this magnificently, and it's still a question on whether or not he could win it. My point is this: Jill Stein voters don't owe you their votes. Republicans don't owe you their votes. Libertarians don't owe you their votes. And it is warped to believe that they do. Bizarre, actually. And unfortunately, yes, this person is going to take the Supreme Court. And yes, the result of that, or the fault of that, is entirely with you and your party. Instead of you getting on your perch and saying, hey, we need to support Medicare for all. You have all of those people out there without health care. We got to support this. 88% of Democrats back it. 70% of the American public back it. We got to do this. And we need to push Joe Biden to do it. You had a perch. You could have been doing it. Rachel Maddow, all of these other lefties, TYT and all of these other people who consider themselves lefties, all of these other groups, progressive groups, could have did the exact same thing. Scream, moan, complain. You are going to lose if you don't represent the interests of these people. And if you notice, in the same way in 2016, the Democratic Party basically fell in line and lefties fell in line and just backed Clinton for nothing, they're doing the same in 2020. Instead of you learning the lessons from 2016 and you making the very specific point that unless you're willing to back the interests of the population, specifically your base and your constituencies, you're going to lose. The reality of it is the majority of the people that don't vote, the overwhelming majority, just so happen to be people of color or people making $30,000 a year or less. Basically, people of color and the poor. The constituencies that the Democratic Party ideally would want. But what happened? Democratic Party had the House of Representatives for like 50 years. What happened? They stopped dealing with the material interests of the public. When the public realized that the public stopped being involved. And you get a section of the electorate that gets involved, yes. But you are basically blaming Jill Stein when nearly 100 million people didn't vote, if not more than that. I think it was like 40-something% of the population didn't vote. And instead of you complaining about that part of the population, why couldn't we get those people? Why are all of these people not voting for us? Why did so many people stop getting involved in the political process? Instead of dealing with those questions, you screamed Trump and Russia, blamed Jill Stein, and acted as if you were blameless. Your failures are your own. They're not Jill Stein's. This is a democratic process. This is a representative government, right? Jill Stein is running in a race, and people who said, we want Jill Stein, voted for Jill Stein. The notice that it was a protest vote. No, not so much. People voted for the person who they wanted. They didn't vote for the person who they didn't want. Clinton, if she wanted those votes, she should have represented the interests of the people that she needed basically to get those votes from. She didn't do it. Biden is not going to do it. Biden may actually win this in spite of that, and that would be an atrocious precedent. But nevertheless, it is not Jill Stein's fault for your failings. Put a pin in it. Remember it. This will come up again. It is not her fault. All of the fault belongs with you and your party for not representing the interests of the public that will organically bring those people to your interests. And right now, Biden is doing the same thing. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not so distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history, this week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. We're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. And we're taking calls. 202-521-1320 is the number to call if you want to call us. By the way, I'm going to give the quick little bit of info here. If you're in the DC area and you want to catch us on the radio there, we're on 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also on in Kansas City, 102.9 FM, 104.7 FM, and 1140 AM. We are also online. We're on Spreaker, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Apple Music, and Spotify. Those are our audio destinations. For video, you should go over to YouTube and do a search for Jamarl Thomas and a search for Fault Lines Radio. Those are two separate channels with their own live feeds every morning as we're live from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. By the way, Jamarl Thomas's channel, he has actual live video of himself there. So if you go to that, you'll see his bright and smiling face every morning. Also, chat feeds going on in both of those platforms. So go check those out. Oh, and while you're there, subscribe to those channels and share those videos after you've liked them, if you will. But yeah, we're taking calls 202-521-1320. Jamarl, it's good to hear you bringing up another name than Bernie. You're talking about Jill Stein here, and it's a little bit easy for us to forget, but she was also jilted back in 2016. I remember this, the whole wave of anti-Russian hysteria leveled, I think, first and foremost against Jill Stein, but Bernie got tinged by it too, if I'm correct.
You're right. Yeah,
that was the main
because they
thing
tried to act as if
that was the main thing that they brought up. Right?
Yeah, it was bizarre. I mean, like, they actually believe that voters who aren't Democrats should vote Democrat. Isn't that bizarre?
It is bizarre, I suppose. I mean, you're trying to expand your party or something like that. The problem is when so many people like you, I don't mean to put you in a category here, but when so many people like you are looking at it, seeing the Democratic Party moving further to the right, it's like this blurring of boundaries, this loss of the horizon. You lose your frame of reference. What is politics actually about in America if what was traditionally a left-right divide is now getting increasingly muddled? I don't know, man. Where does that leave us? What's your take?
I think it leaves us in the position that I said is necessary. Because think of 2020 for the moment. Let's take everything else off the table, just 2020. And you have two people who are running in the primary, and one person who's running in the primary is pushing for all of these policies, and all of them are popular. And in the context of pushing for the policies that are popular, you have one other guy who's running, who's not really running on policy at all. He's just running, I'm the guy who could beat Trump, period. That guy wins, despite the fact he lost on all of the policy ideas. He gets into the race, and then there's a pandemic with 30 million people who are out of a job, and you have, 40 million people who are out of healthcare. Now, my frame of reference says you got to deal with that. FDR, when it was the Great Depression, he had to deal with that. And instead of dealing with that, what you get is go vote for the other guy. Because what they realize is that the scam is in place. They found somebody who's grotesque on the other side, who allows them to basically go for their corporate interests, unabashed and unashamedly. And so, yeah, they're going to march Republicans on this stage. Dan Snyder, the one, Rick Snyder, I believe his name, the one that was in, was it Michigan with the water? That guy's backing Joe Biden. And so it's like, you know, Joe Biden at this point feels, I don't have to do anything. I don't have to advocate for anything. Even the Obamacare stuff, where he was saying that there was going to be a public option, even that's off the table. I know people, I've seen people online who are like, Joe Biden is going to do this, this, and this. And I'm like, dude, you need to read the Wall Street Journal. You need to read the Washington Post. You need to read, basically, stop watching Rachel Maddow and actually read stuff that gets into the idea of what he's doing, the number of billionaires that are backing him, the number of companies that are backing him. And even this talk of like, hey, when Wall Street was upset with Joe Biden made it very clear that that stuff is just talk for the Warren crowd. I could have told you that months ago. It's politics, right? I mean, the place for public, what they need to realize is that the political space is just one area of combat. It's just one. It's not the only one. Protests is one. But also leverage. What you're looking for is any ability, any capacity for leverage, whatever that is. It may be something that may adversely affect you in the process of you using it, but you still use it because it's all you got. Companies or workers go on strike. Why? It's not because they love it. It's not because it's great for them. It's because they realize at a certain point either they're being exploited or something is going on that is not in their interest. And it is better for them to take the hit of the strike and to place the company on notice so that their pain is not their pain alone. Democrats or lefties supposedly love unions and love strikes, and yet it never occurs to them to do anything but face down, butt up. No, the response in this chain, the only response is to extricate yourself from the party and say, we're doing this for America. This is what we want. And if you want to tank it, that's on you. But that's not what the left is doing. That's not what anybody else is doing. They're just basically saying, we owe our vote to Joe Biden. And I think that's atrocious and appalling for any notion of democracy or representative government.
I think that they see Joe Biden as a life raft that they can cling on to. I mean, I remember back during the primaries, the word that kept getting thrown around, that gets tossed around every election year, I think, is electability, which is one of those wonderful abstract nouns. That functionally seems to mean something like controllability. So if you have a computer in your brain that you can automatically replace one phrase with another, it might be useful to just replace the word electability wherever you see it with controllability. Because back in 2016, I would argue that 2020 was a bit different on the other side of 2016. But back in 2016, Bernie was the electable guy. Yeah. Bernie and the electable candidate. Really, I don't mean to exclude Hillary Clinton right out of the gate there, but he was the person who would have been elected by, I think, a much broader majority of Americans than Hillary Clinton. He would have stood a fighting chance against Trump, and he might have, arguably would have beat him. But why didn't he get let through that gauntlet? Well, of course, because he's not controllable. He might be predictable.
Well, he's controllable.
Here's another thing. I don't mean to.
He's clearly controllable
by whom? That's the thing.
I guess I'm saying he's clearly
I mean, he proved to be controllable because he went along with it.
Right.
I mean, that's sadly the thing. Again, can you see him as anything but an unintentional spoiler at that point, though? If they let him get to that point, sort of arouse people's hopes and then suppress those hopes, by pushing him out, is that just a de facto spoiler?
No, because I think, look, if it was me, if I'm one of those people in the Stop Sanders meeting, I would be thinking two things. A, you let him run. B, once he loses, because he will lose, he's running in the party, a party to which he's not part of, he will back you. So regardless of what you say about Sanders, you can call him sexist, racist. You could say, it's sexist of him to get in a race, to run against Hillary Clinton. You could say he's playing a sport.
You call him anti-Semitic.
But the catch is, he will back you afterwards. It doesn't matter what you say to Sanders. You can call Sanders any name in the book. If you're a Democrat and you're running in the race and you got somebody who's across from him that he's scared of, and he doesn't want to be called Ralph Nader, he's a controllable factor. And that controllable factor will tell people, go vote for Joe Biden. And Joe Biden is a lefty, and there's going to be a progressive presidency. He would tell him all this nonsense. He would tell him that. So he's a controllable factor. Like, if it's me, you have to let him run in the contest. You just have to make sure he loses. That's all. I mean, because think of the number of lefties that backed Clinton. And this was when Sanders was clearly cheated. When Donna Brazile comes out and gives this thing of saying, you know, the cancer. Basically, yeah, they were rigging it against Sanders. Sanders still backed her. And the majority of lefties, you had more lefties, percentage-wise, to vote for Clinton than you had vote for Obama that was backing Clinton. Like, I hope you understand what I mean by this. So it's like, you do let Sanders run. That you just need to make sure Sanders loses. However he loses, he's going to back you either way. I mean, that's sad, but that's true. And by the way, they're calling this a coup. Have you heard them say this? Have you heard Democrats be like, oh, it's a coup that he's putting his person in? How is it a coup? He's the president of the United States. And it's like the people of this country voted for the president. Part of his powers is to put in his Supreme Court pick. I don't have to love it. It's just kind of is what it is, and I don't accept this notion of a coup. What was a coup was not accepting the election result in 2016, and then acting as if the president of the United States was working with a foreign power, when all of that, over the course of the 3 years, comes back false. One instance after the next. They still use that. Did you hear the interview between Lawrence O'Donnell and Kamala Harris? And she acted as if, hey, maybe there's something nefarious going on between Russians. Even now she's doing that. Even Peter Schiff, Shifty Schiff, he even does that. Even after all of the information comes out that shows one instance after the next, they want his returns. New York Times got his returns, basically said, we don't see anything but the Russians that we didn't already know. And still, they would add that.
By the way,
but we don't necessarily know what goes on behind his taxes. Phenomenal.
It's Adam Schiff. Just a quick sort of fact right there. Adam Schiff. I'm sure is the one you're talking about.
I said Peter Schiff. Oh, I'm sorry.
Peter
Adam.
Schiff.
Oh, yeah. I'm thinking of the gentleman from that Richard Wolff was arguing with yesterday. I'm sorry. But yeah, Adam Schiff. But he comes out and basically still uses that line of attack. I mean, it's astonishing. So it's like they're calling a coup something that's not a coup. And the thing that was a soft coup that they tried to get away with, that's just the normal process of business. So weird. So weird, Shane. And by the way, one last thing, Shane. Joe Biden shouldn't be doing that debate with Donald Trump. Kamala Harris should. Because I still believe that Kamala Harris is an end run around what the American public wanted. That they believe that Joe Biden is not going to be able to carry the burden for long, and that her as vice president will eventually be able to subsume the role of president, which is who they wanted in the first place. That wasn't who the American public wanted. And yet, they're trying to get her in and run. I could be wrong. That's my own little pet conspiracy theory, but I don't necessarily think that's obscene in regards to...
oh, not at all.
Yeah, I don't think that's out there.
I think you're understating it.
It's like, does the party think about what they want? Yes, clearly. And did they want her in the beginning? It seemed that they did, yeah.
Yeah, again, to be clear, I think you're understating it. I think you're being a little bit too tentative here. I think that the assumption among the vast majority of voters is that Joe Biden, awkwardly, as president, is going to be taking a back seat in a lot of the policy decisions here, because frankly, the sort of hidden assumption that I think everybody's, either explicitly making, or if you're a Democrat, trying not to make and trying not to bring up at all costs, is that Joe Biden has serious cognitive issues that are becoming ever more readily apparent. And that, whether he passes or not, other people are going to have their hands on the wheel, are going to have their hands on the reins, so to speak. You brought up, I just want to go back to the Russia thing for a second. I would call it beating a dead horse, but it's sort of like a stalking horse. Like it's just, in the sort of idiomatic sense of the term. It seems like they're using this to creep forward more and more foreign antagonism in general, specifically against Russia, but the Democrats are willing to go up against China too. It seems like there's that political pressure being built up for some kind of foreign intervention, something like that. And again, it's worrying to see that happening during 2020, during this time of unprecedented global, I'm not going to say catastrophe, but in terms of how deeply it's affected the global economy, you can use that as tantamount to economic catastrophe, apparently. So it's worrying to see that as the natural response on the part of the American intelligence establishment and political establishment as such. One quick thing, I just wanted to come back before we got too far past it. You kind of were dismissing, I don't want to misrepresent you, but it sounded like you were dismissing electoral politics. But here's the thing, we're talking about electoral politics at the national level. ultimately you have a lot more control over electoral politics at the local level. And if you create that sort of seedbed of grassroots local political candidates, that I think if you do that on a county by county basis, not that they're, it's going to be a bunch of different people doing it. It's not like you, Jamarl, going around to different counties trying to elect all these different people. But if we have that undercurrent, then ultimately that's what shifts the party. That's what shifts the national conversation too. In any event, we've got to go to a break. Go for it. Take it back, Jamarl, if you'd like to. Now let's just go to a break. All right, you're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. We will be back in just a minute.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to cash them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am here with my co-host, Shane Stranahan. Joining us is Dr. Alex Vitale, professor of sociology and coordinator of the Policing and Social Justice Project at Brooklyn College and a visiting professor at London South Bank University. Dr. Alex, welcome to the show. Or I should say Dr. Vitale, welcome to the show.
Alex is fine. No doctor needed.
Okay, fair enough. I am so glad that you can join us because there was an article that came out in the New York Times basically making the point of why Defund the Police failed in Minneapolis. Now, Minneapolis is where George Floyd was killed, and it's where basically it set off all sorts of stuff in the country. I mean, from the standpoint of marches and protests and riots, you had all across the world, people marching and everything else. And to me, my thought was defund the police is too diminutive for what you really need to get at. Because what you really need to get at is poverty. That's the issue. I mean, he's basically was passing a $20 check when all of this took place. If you go to Michael Brown, they said Michael Brown was selling Lucy's. I'm making a point in both of these cases, neither of these situations take place if a person was financially secure. I also did a little bit of research. I made the argument that Jacob Blake's issue, or that the protest, was not entirely about Jacob Blake. And I went and showed the issues of Wisconsin and poverty and that type of stuff. Well, I started to do the same thing for Minnesota. Minnesota poverty level, blacks, 43.2%. Whites, 12.1%. If you're looking at the average, or let's say the median income, for blacks it was $36,000 in 2018. For whites, it was $83,000 for a typical white family. That's astonishing. And you can go further with this. I mean, you can even go into the different neighborhoods. And you could see like the poverty levels in the various neighborhoods and everything else. I guess I try to make the point that the issue with policing is only part of the issue. Like there's a part that's accountability, that's a factor in that. But there's another part of that, that's poverty. And you can look at crime rates, you can look at areas that have more violence, even the people who the violence is committed against and the people who are committing the violence in many of these places. It's the areas and it's the neighborhoods and it's the lack of resources in those neighborhoods. Now, am I entirely wrong on this? Because the article is basically saying defund the police failed in Minneapolis, in Minnesota. And my argument is part and parcel to the reason that it failed is because it didn't get to the root of the issue, which was poverty.
So I think, first of all, the New York Times never met a left populist movement that it didn't want to undermine and denigrate. They have no interest in supporting these kinds of left populist movements. They prefer technocratic solutions delivered by elites, that reproduce the status quo, essentially. So I think we should take the New York Times piece with a little bit of a grain of salt. I wouldn't see this as a failure of the movement. It was the failure of a particular legislative effort. But the movement in Minneapolis to quote defund the police, which is not exactly the best way to describe it, is alive and well. Now, is defund the police, meaning shifting resources from policing to community needs, the same as really directly addressing economic and racial injustice in the United States? No. I think you're absolutely right in this regard. When we look back at the big uprisings, riots, protests of the 1960s for racial justice, many of them were triggered by policing, but we don't look back on that movement and say, oh, that was just about policing, right? This was about a broad movement for racial justice. And I think the same is true today. However, I think that the defund the police movement, as we understand it more broadly, is important. And if we look at sort of like the comments of Huey P. Newton and some other people from the 1960s, from the Black Panther movement, et cetera, they understood the need to address the immediate needs of the community. Free breakfast programs, neighborhood health clinics, as a way of helping people to survive while they built a more radical movement. And I think we could understand defund the police in a similar way. We've got to get that burden of policing and mass incarceration off the necks of these vulnerable communities, and in the process, hopefully create space for a kind of broader politics.
No, that's fair. I accept that. But I think, and you're right about the New York Times, that's fair too. But there is a reality to it, right? Like the gun violence that spiked in that area when they were pushing to defund the police. Now, some of that, a person can argue, is the cops not liking the emphasis that are on the cops, and they pull back on their responsibilities and the things that they were doing. Missing the point that, hey, we still kind of want you to do your job, we just don't want you to be abusive while you're doing your job. Is that a fair point, though? I mean, this was something that people were getting on AOC for. It's like, hey, what's with all this gun violence and everything else that's taking place in New York now that you guys are going after the cops? I mean, there is a structural element to this, that the cops are there for a reason, and it's not necessarily to be abusive or to be, horrible to the community, but more so, if you have a society that is ensconced in poverty, you need some element to keep order, because poverty at that point makes crime and violence a rational act. Is that fair? I mean, I guess I'm trying to get to the point so that...
Well,
go ahead.
Well, let's think about this for a second. So, obviously, if we had nothing, if we just immediately removed all police tomorrow, certain kinds of problems would emerge because, as you pointed out, we live in a society with deep inequalities, deep insecurities, deep histories of trauma. And I think a big part of the reason for the uptick in violence we've seen this summer in certain places is tied to the trauma that people in those communities are experiencing, from the economic slowdown, from the disparate effects of COVID-19, and there's a lot of fear and anger and trauma that's getting expressed as this violence. Now, should we assume, though, that the best way to handle this is to let the police do their job of focusing on serious crime, because that is what will, help stabilize things in the immediate moment? I think we have other options that are available right now to address the immediate crisis that don't rely just on policing. And I think part of what the defund the police movement is saying is we want cities to invest in those other approaches, because policing, even to the extent that it may work, comes with these huge collateral costs, right? The incarceration, the brutality, the constant harassment. Even when police are only focused on, quote, serious crime, that comes with a tremendous amount of harassment of the public.
Not to mention the consequences when the public gets harassed, or when that person gets put in a cage.
Exactly.
When that person gets out his prospects of getting a job. Like, all of those things get diminished. So I agree with you. This isn't a rah-rah cops. I guess I'm thinking of it in terms of a systemic thing of, in order to get rid of cops, you have to do it organically. Meaning it's like you have to find ways to undermine the reason that they're there. And to me, that hits at the thing of poverty. So I'm glad that you hit that. Because the Defund the Police movement, the idea was take funds from the police and put it into other services. It's just an unfortunate name for it because people think it's abolish the cops. Let me ask you this. What would be those other methods? Because I agree with you. That's a good point. That all of this stuff that's going on, the people who are basically stuck in their houses, the people who are lost their jobs, 30 million people, you would expect an uptick of crime of sorts. I guess I would say that the uptick seemed to be specific in certain areas where these guys are trying to find something else. So let me ask you this. What is something else? What is a way of mending the gap between those moments of, okay, we want to defund the police and we want to take money from this. The cops don't want to necessarily do their jobs at this point because they're angry. How do we deal with that transitional period in between those two periods?
Well, I agree. It has to be done, as you said, organically, in the sense that we need to work with communities to identify what the specific public safety challenges are that they face, and then to lay out concrete alternatives to policing that could address those specific concerns. And of course, every community's concerns are not the same. But let's just look at a couple of specific things, right? Let's say that the problem is one of, homeless encampments and people having mental health crises out on the corner and overdoses and things like that. Well, we can look at those cities that have created non-police emergency response capacity that can do outreach to folks, that can help guide people voluntarily without coercion and threats into, emergency shelters, community-based mental health services, et cetera, to reduce the impact of those problems on the community. But let's say it's something more serious, like shootings, like youth violence. We've got a lot of cities that are using violence interrupters or credible messenger programs, sometimes under the heading of cure violence. So these are neighborhood-based groups that hire people from the community who have, a reputation, maybe were involved in violence when they were younger, to work with the younger generation to try to break that cycle of violence, to steer people into trauma counseling, into pro-social activities, but also to just concretely try to do things like rumor control and help people overcome these beefs that sometimes escalate, into shooting. And we've got a growing body of research that shows that this works, that it can dramatically reduce the number of shootings in a community. And if we put, 1/10 of the dollars we put into policing into these neighborhood-based programs, we could see some pretty dramatic transformations.
I can't help but, I'll be honest, I can't help but agree. Alex, thank you for joining us. My name is Shane. Glad to have you with us. By the way, I want to get into this a little bit more next segment because we're about to be hitting a break here, but you're also the author of the book, The End of Policing, released in 2017. I want to come back on that. Let's just go into the break right now so we can get into that conversation. Talking about the Defund the Police movement, what happened in Minneapolis, and where this movement could be going. Also discussing with Dr. Alex Vitale his book, The End of Policing, 2017 release. We'll be back in just a minute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan.
Fault Lines.
So Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan and Dr. Alex Vitale, professor of sociology and coordinator of the Policing and Social Justice Project at Brooklyn College, also a visiting professor at London South Bank University and the author of The End of Policing. Alex, thank you again for being with us. I wanted to get into this book. In the sort of blurbs for the book, it is usually described as advocating the abolition of police, which would really strike at the core. That would represent, the defund the police movement. If the ultimate goal here, or if one possible end goal, one desirable end goal, would be to abolish the police and replace it with other services, some other enforcement mechanism. We can even question the use of the term enforcement here. I'm just curious, what do you see that process looking like? Is that description fair? And if you do want to abolish the police in the long run, what do you see that process looking like, especially when it comes to the, serious crimes that you were talking about, things like actual violence, murder, stuff like that? Alex.
Right. So there's a lot of different ways of thinking about this, and not everyone's on exactly the same page. I think about police abolition in three ways. First, it's an analysis that understands that policing as an institution has always existed to facilitate regimes of exploitation like colonialism, slavery, industrialization, and now this, massive neoliberal austerity politics of inequality, mass homelessness, et cetera. And when we have that analysis, we understand that a lot of the superficial reforms like body cameras and implicit bias training are not going to fix the problem. So it helps us avoid the mistake of embracing these procedural reforms to policing. It's also about a process. There's no magic switch that someone's going to flip tomorrow and then poof, all police are gone, right? Police exist in massive numbers, and we're talking about engaging in a political process of dialing back the scope and intensity of policing in very concrete ways to get them out of schools, get them out of the mental health business, get them out of the homelessness business, get them out of the drug business, get them out of the sex work business, and replace them with alternatives that will actually make communities safer than they are today. Now, where does that lead to ultimately? Well, that's a question of vision, about trying to get to a world that doesn't rely on people with guns patrolling the streets to produce safety, doesn't have to rely on putting human beings in cages. And I think that's a world we should all aspire to, but no one really claims to know exactly what that world looks like or exactly how to get there. It's just a desire that motivates the movement and keeps us from investing in reforms to just re-legitimate policing or actually expand policing.
So to be clear, and I'm just going to try to briefly restate it. The first point that you brought up is this sort of ideal one. It is the purest distillation of it. And I don't want to really get into that too much because I think that we'd get immediately lost in this abstract philosophical conversation about the use of force, whether the use of force is ever just. You're talking about how states historically have always used police because those states have been corrupt or exploitative, basically, is a better term to use. I don't want to misrepresent you on that, but I also just wanted to sort of highlight that as the pure thing that if we're going to have a conversation about it, we might want to come back to that. But on that last point, you're saying it would make sense to put forward as a vision the idea that it's possible to live in a world where in our societies, in our countries, whatever political institutions govern us in this ideal future, we don't need police. I agree that I like the sound of that. What I'm worried about is using the desire to reach that world, pursuing that desire while ignoring some of the negative side effects of pulling back policing in the, imperfect world that we currently live in. What seems to have happened is that as people have called for the police to be defunded, and as the police have stepped back, in many of these cities, violence has increased. And so I guess, what's your response to that? What's your take on that call and response issue, Alex?
The increase in violence is not specific to cities that have pulled back policing. First of all, almost no city has actually pulled back any policing. There have been movements, there have been demands. A few cities have created a pilot program here or there, but none of these cities have actually dialed back policing. Now, some of the police may have gone on slowdowns and things like that, but even that is not correlated with what is really a broad national trend of upticks in violence. And most crime, though, most serious crime in the U.S. is continuing to go down. So this idea that there's this one-to-one correlation just doesn't connect. But the other thing is that this is a public safety movement led by people who've experienced tremendous violence in their lives. And the last thing they want is some kind of free-for-all of violence. They're saying, look, police have not kept us safe historically. We need better alternatives than policing. We need community-based family supports to reduce domestic violence. We need violence interrupters. We need jobs for our young people. We need schools that really work. And that these are actually concrete strategies to make these communities safer than they are today.
Let me ask you this. Where do we go from here? Like, this movement is still going on. You still have the protests. You still have, especially after the Breonna Taylor issue. The most interesting thing about George Floyd being killed and all of the people being, the protests and everything that originated from it. Cops kill 1,000 people a year. I think the weirdest of that was that the officer that did that, what is his name, Calvin, whatever his name is, he seemed like he was doing the most normal thing in the world. Because to him, I think he thought he was. Where do we go from here? And where does this movement go from here in trying to get the stuff, changed, accountability, those type of items added into our world, to have our world to be a better place than what it was before all of this stuff kicked off?
Well, I think we need to come to grips with the reality that the existing criminal legal system is not going to be the tool that's going to fix policing. That with the way that the Breonna Taylor case was handled, I think this really exemplifies this. That as far as the legal system is concerned, what the police did was essentially legal. And so all these appeals to like jail killer cops are not going to get us any real notion of justice. I think real justice in these cases involves an accounting, a truth telling about what happened, but also systemic change. Reducing the burden of policing on these communities by getting the police out in as many ways as we possibly can. And how do we begin that? Well, I would say get them out of the mental health business would be a good place to start. We're seeing a lot of cities move in this direction. Between 1.25% of all people killed by police are having a mental health problem or suffer from some kind of disability. And so if we could create alternative infrastructures to respond to those calls other than using armed police, we would immediately save a huge number of lives.
So I agree with that. I mean, here's the thing: when it comes to practical conversations about how to reduce the extent to which police are responsible for, enforcing things they shouldn't be enforcing, frankly, when it comes to the abuse of the drug laws over recent decades, when it comes to abuses of police violence, as we've seen notoriously this year, the abuse of force in procedures, tactics that frankly shouldn't be permitted. Those kinds of reforms seem completely sensible, and it seems like that's within the Overton window of what people are willing to talk about. But where this gets confusing is the movement Defund the Police has as its name, defund the police. It is an inherently sort of ambiguous, inherently broad, and an inherently kind of, it could be extreme if you take it in one direction. I guess I'm excited to have somebody who's actually arguing to abolish the police, because it seems like an opportunity to have a conversation with somebody on that pure point. Again, you were talking about how
is not the best possible way to frame this. It was something that would fit on a cardboard sign at a protest. It was something that would fit in a hashtag, but it's actually not a term that I ever used before this summer. I've tried to talk about the need to reduce policing and invest in communities to reimagine public safety without criminalization, but it's harder to reduce all that down. So I think we need to continue to explore different kinds of language, how we talk about these issues, and try also to understand that not every idea can be reduced down to 3 words.
I agree completely, and that's why there's something wrong, I'd argue, with mottos in general, but that's another conversation, a much weirder conversation we probably don't have the time for. I mean, here's the thing, that you were saying that the rates of serious violence have gone down. I guess it depends on what timescale you're talking about. If it's decades, then that cuts against the notion that police inherently are increasing violence. You know, if the police force has been increased, its ability to use its force has been increased over time. If you're talking about this year, I mean, COVID might help, but here's the thing, anecdotally, admittedly it's anecdotal, but a lot of what we're going on, including including all of the specific instances of police violence that have been abuses, have been anecdotal so far. These have been specific data points, not the result of some longitudinal study. Anecdotally, I've seen a lot of instances where in these cities where police have decided to pull back, either because they've been asked to pull back by the mayors or because they're worried that they're going to be over-prosecuted for trying to protect people, frankly. I've seen a lot of cases of crimes going unreported, of wait times of an hour, 2 hours for responses from 911 just in the past couple of days. I mean, this is, again, unrelated. I'm just bringing this up kind of just because it's interesting. In Minnesota, Colorado, Arizona, the 911 number stopped working for a couple of minutes up to half an hour in some cases, and people started freaking out. So I guess my point is, existentially as a society, it seems like we are still tied in. We are still dependent on the use of police force. And I guess I in your book, because you're arguing for the abolition of the police in the long run, and if that's something to aim for, I kind of wanted to have a conversation about that specifically. What's your take on that issue? How do you see them specifically when it comes to violent crimes? How do you see police being cut back? What do you see their role, for the community in this? I guess my concern here is you just get vigilantism. If you don't have police doing this kind of thing, then you have people making citizens arrests. And as we saw in the case of Ahmaud Arbery, that does not always go as it should.
But Shane,
what's your take, Alex?
Wait, Shane. I don't think he's talking about everything else remaining equal and abolish cops. I understand what you're saying. You're saying basically, look, the world is a cesspool and you need something to cover it. But I think his point, or at the very least my point, is change your world and you organically get rid of cops. And so it's not get rid of cops and the world will be fine. I don't think that's where he's going with that. I mean, am I wrong, Alex?
That's right. I mean, no one who's really working in this movement, who's doing organizing in communities, is going around saying, step one, get rid of all police. Step two, figure something else out. What they're saying is we have some very concrete needs that have been identified in specific communities that we think will work better than policing. Not the same as better than policing. And this includes issues around serious violence, domestic violence, gun violence, gang violence. We have specific proven strategies to reduce that kind of serious crime that is better than policing. But cities refuse to invest in them. They prefer to send the police. And that is a political problem, and that is what people are trying to address. They're trying to build the political power to say, why can't we have high-quality, neighborhood-based mental health services? Why can't we have community-based family support centers? Why can't we have jobs for our young people? These things are the things that will really reduce the violence. No one is saying, well, we'll just get rid of all police and then we'll figure it out later.
So again, as far as that goes, we completely agree. There's no contest, no confrontation there. Again, the drug war, just as an example of the abuse of the governmental power, frankly, not just police power, has done unprecedented harm for Americans. So again, we agree completely there. Dr. Alex Vitale, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, guys.
Absolutely. For those listening, that was Dr. Alex S. Vitale, professor of sociology and coordinator at the Policing and Social Justice Project at Brooklyn College and a visiting professor at London South Bank University, also the author of the book, The End of Policing. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. We will be back in just a minute with headlines.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, welcome to your daily inoculation for propaganda. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, ever vigilant, the last antibody to a sick and seizing political system, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the politically independent corner, I am your investigative political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
You are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Let's get to the headlines. In the news, President Trump and Joe Biden will debate tonight in Cleveland in the first three of such debates occurring within the next few weeks. The candidates will be discussing the coronavirus, the economy, the Supreme Court, election integrity. Not on the list of topics are Black Lives Matter, foreign policy, and climate change. Now, the moderator, Chris Wallace, has said he will not be fact-checking the candidates' answers. The debate will begin at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. The reason that Wallace is saying that is because in the debate between Romney and Obama, Romney was fact-checked, and that fact-check damaged Romney significantly. So Wallace is basically saying, I am not going to do that. More than 1 million deaths have been attributed to the coronavirus. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said in a statement, our world has reached an agonizing milestone. It's a mind-numbing figure, yet we must never lose sight of each and every individual life. They are fathers and mothers, wives and husbands, brothers and sisters, friends and colleagues. He is so right. A research paper published in the Journal of American Medical Association Internal Medicine found that among more than 3,200 adults aged 18 to 34 who were hospitalized with COVID-19, 21% required intensive care, 10% required mechanical ventilation, and nearly 3%, 88 patients, died. This is coming out of NBC News discussing the risk to younger adults. House Democrats have released a $2.2 trillion corona relief bill, a trimmed-down version of a $3.4 trillion bill that has passed the House in May. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has said that the new bill will reflect what she calls Democrats' willingness to work with Republicans on a coronavirus relief package. The new bill includes money for the Paycheck Protection Program, for providing loans to small businesses, for state and local governments, and another round of direct payment to individuals. The bill will also revive weekly federal unemployment benefits, which expired in July. California Governor Gavin Newsom has declared emergencies for 3 counties due to rapid growth of 2 fires. The Glass Fire, which has consumed 56 square miles since Sunday, and the Zog Fire in Northern California, which has burned over 48 square miles so far. The National Weather Service says Northern California continues to see excessive heat today. Police departments in several cities reported 911 outages in their emergency call system on Monday. It is unclear what caused the disruptions, which have now been resolved. Some outages were for a few minutes, others lasted for an hour. Departments in Arizona, Colorado, Minnesota reported the issue. The human rights group Amnesty International has said that it's been forced to suspend its work in India after saying it has faced reprisals for the Indian government or from the Indian government and frozen bank accounts there. In 2016, the Indian government accused Amnesty International of sedition and has said that it's been investigating the organization for breaking foreign funding laws. Fighting has continued for a third night between Armenian and Azerbaijan forces over the disputed region of Nagorno-Karabakh. The UN Security Council plans to convene later today in order to address the ongoing clashes. Turkey, meanwhile, has said it is ready to support Azerbaijan in both its negotiations and its combat with Armenia. And The Guardian has reported that Turkey is hiring rebels from Syria to fight for Azerbaijan in its conflict with Armenia. Azerbaijan has claimed that Armenian forces have lost 550 servicemen. Armenia has reported only several dozen casualties and has said that Azerbaijan has lost hundreds so far. The most recent on this is Azerbaijan, well, that was most recent, but there's also Azerbaijan artillery and aircraft have pounded, this is RT actually, have pounded a military base in Armenia, and a civilian bus has been hit in a drone strike. the Armenian Defense Ministry reported, telling its rival to brace itself for a harsh response. It sounds like this is only going to get worse. And last, the World Bank has warned that developing countries in East Asia and the Pacific will likely see poverty rise for the first time in 20 years, with 5 million people likely to face or to fall back into poverty due to measures used to contain the coronavirus outbreak. Those are your headlines. You are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So I want to talk about the debates. As you mentioned, or as we mentioned in the headlines, there are going to be multiple topics in the debates by Chris Wallace. Chris Wallace is going to lead it. Personally, Fox News actually has really good debates. I would even go so far as to say, at least, I can't give examples of this. It's only my impression over time. But the debates themselves that Fox News has been throwing, I remember those debates being pretty good. Now, I don't know if this is because they feel like they need to push back against what people expect them to, be, which is Fox News, or what. But especially when they're talking or questioning Republicans, they tend to be more important. So the debate tonight, Joe Biden, Donald Trump, they're going to talk about the coronavirus, the economy, the Supreme Court, election integrity, and of course, the thing that's been added has been Trump's taxes. Now, Black Lives Matter, foreign policy, climate, those aren't on the table for the debate. Shane, what do you think is going to happen here? I did a show yesterday where I gave my thoughts on what needed to take place for both candidates, meaning Donald Trump has 2 weaknesses. One is that he's the president. And in my experience, or at the very least in my memory, like Obama, when he first came back from the debates after being president for like 3-4 years, he lost. Like he couldn't do it. And then in the next 2 debates, he regained his footing and, got it right. Basically, the president, because he has yes men around him constantly, has somewhat of a hard time to reacclimate to the environment where I think I described it as Black Panther, getting rid of the serum and stepping into the pool in order to fight. Well, the president does the same thing. He gets rid of the presidential garb, the people telling him yes, sir, and no, sir, and all of this other stuff, and gets into a ring with somebody who is trying to punch him in the face constantly. And I'm saying this rhetorically from the standpoint of politics. Presidents, at least in my experience, don't do well at that, at least in the beginning. Now, I could be wrong on this. Trump might come in and, he's bucked the trend on some of this stuff. Most presidents age viciously when they're in office. Trump didn't seem to age a day. So he might do okay. Who knows? But the topics themselves, how does he deal with this? And I'm asking you, Shane, like when Mike Pence was in that debate with Mike Pence and, Mike Pence and Tim Kaine. Kaine lost that debate. And it's like, how could Kaine lose that debate? The only thing Kaine really had to do was point out one thing that Donald Trump said. Do you agree with it? And that's what he did in the debate. And somehow, Pence was able to get out of it. Will Trump be able to do the same? Trump has to win this. It can't be, it looks like a draw. Trump is in what I would consider to be a difficult spot. And he needs to change the conversation around. And changing that conversation means he needs to have a strong debate performance. Biden basically needs to draw. That's all he's been trying to do the entire election. So what do you think, Shane? And not just what do they have to do, what do you think is going to happen despite what they may have to do?
Trump will probably try to frazzle Biden, and Biden will probably get frazzled. That's broadly how I see things going. Trump seems to be the strong fighter type. That's a bit of an understatement, maybe, in terms of verbosity, his propensity to just switch from topic to topic. He's like one of those boxers who likes to stay light on the balls of their feet, something like this. Right. So I can see that happening. I can see him trying to throw Biden off, and I can see Biden getting successfully thrown off and frazzled. And if he's in an already weakened mental state, and if Biden has a history of making these weird off-the-cuff remarks, like the thing about liking how the kids like to watch the hairs on his legs rise up, glistening in the sunlight. You probably remember what I'm talking about.
I remember that, with T-Bone. Was it T-Bone? Where they were at the pool or something? Like T-Bone was a bad dude, and the guy... God, that's so weird. You're right.
It's not...
Because he was saying the kids used to rub his, it was something like that. Leg hair or something?
Exactly, yeah. When they'd go swimming. It was just... My point is, if that's where he was months ago, unless he's undergone some continuous treatments of steroids, which, hey, who knows? I don't see how things are going to be any better. In fact, they're probably going to be worse. And if he's in that space where he's a little bit impulsive, that extends to your emotions too. And so I could see Trump aiming for that, trying to throw him off kilter. And if Biden gets thrown off kilter and starts talking nonsense or starts to overreact, I think that could be what does him in. If that generates sound bites, if the media starts to pick that up, I could see that being a major change in the election. So that's, first off, I can see Trump going for that. That's kind of where I think he's going to go. But again, I mean, the topics are kind of circumscribed here. They're not going to be getting into the Black Lives Matter stuff, which is a big thing that Biden could be using against Trump. We'll see if he tries to bring that in. They're not going to be talking about climate change, which again, Trump major EPA rollbacks with the fires on the West Coast, even if you're going to question whether or not those are directly related to climate change.
Well, let me ask you this.
Hurricanes.
The Black Lives Matter thing
so
is
much you could hit him on.
Well, the Black Lives Matter thing is an interesting topic because it's like it depends on where the topic goes and the questions that are asked. Because Trump is going to argue law and order. That's going to be his argument. I mean, that seems to be the argument that he's picked up on. Law and order, law and order. We need to, hold the streets, control the streets. What he would probably do, though, is just lie. Like for example, if Social Security comes up, Joe Biden flagrantly lied about Social Security. There are videos of him basically saying, let's freeze it, or Paul Ryan was right. And yet he would come out and say, I never said that. Or freezing, the balanced budget amendment, which is one of the most right-wing, insane things, and that gets across no understanding of government and the way government works, especially from the standpoint of sovereign currency. Biden was backing that nonsense. And so it's like, yes, Donald, I don't know, I think it's more nuanced. Joe Biden has a record of criminal justice that is atrocious. Now, I don't see that as one of the topics, but if you're talking about Black Lives Matter and you're talking about the protests, you're invariably are going to get to riots, which gets into this whole, it's weird. I don't necessarily think it's all that straightforward. I think it's more nuanced on some of this stuff. Like a foreign policy. Is Joe Biden better on foreign policy? I don't think so. I think that's a feather in Trump's cap, not in Biden's cap. But again, it depends on how Trump talks about it. And because Trump is such a wild card, it's hard to know. I was looking at old Trump debates, the debate between him and Hillary Clinton, and the debate between him and Jeb Bush when they were going back over the Iraq War. He can debate when he's good. The problem is he creates so much headwind for himself that you have to answer that stuff. And the catch is, I don't know what Trump is going to show up at this debate. And by the way, we're taking calls. 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. You can talk about this or pretty much anything else that we've been discussing. So let me ask you this. Who do you think wins at the end of this debate? Do you think Trump is going to be able to change the conversation based on the topics? Or do you think Biden, like Trump said, is going to be injected with something, maybe a B12 shot, and it's just up and at him the entire debate? Like when Biden debated Sanders, did you think he did a bad job?
Yes, I do.
Really? I didn't think he did too horrible against Sanders as a one-on-one. I mean, granted, Sanders wasn't going after him. So it wasn't like an antagonistic opponent where your opponent was actively trying to take your head off and debone you. So, but even with that, you thought he did a bad job. Did you believe he won any of those debates?
I mean, I thought
he
he did okay,
but
but frankly,
presence in any of the debates.
The assumption here at the time was that he was the shoe-in candidate. The assumption here is that he was the establishment dude. I mean, you had Buttigieg as a sort of alternative contender. Obviously, you had Kamala. And then Bernie was the people's choice, whatever that means. But the assumption that I had throughout those, throughout the debates and the primaries was that Biden was just going to get through it. I'll be honest.
But he was weak. I mean, in all of those debates, he was extraordinary. In one debate, Biden said the most racist thing I've ever said in my life, that I've ever heard in my life. He said, black folks don't take care of their kids. Now, he basically was trying to say they need to listen to the record player. She asked him, how do you deal with the legacy of slavery, especially in your comments, let's say 40 years ago, where you're saying, I don't owe anybody anything, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And Biden goes into this weird comment about education, and then he's like, you got to play the record player. They got more words. And then he says something like, they don't know, they can't, they need help. They need an agent from the government to go in and help them take care of their kids. They don't know any different. I'm paraphrasing, but basically saying black folks can take care of their kids. Now, the media, immediately after that, I can't think of the woman, she's a Democrat, she immediately flips out. It was like, oh my God, I can't believe you said that. My point is, you're right. If he goes into the weeds and says some just weird stuff, that could be the topic of the debate, and that could change the conversation for the debate. So let's do this. Let's take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com. By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind. Color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik. Fault Lines.
And we're back. Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. And we're taking your calls. 202-521-1320 is the number to call. We've got 3 people on the line right now and room for some more. First, let's go to Michael calling in from Silver Spring. Michael, you're on the line. What's going on?
My opinion, based on the last guest, is not necessarily, again, it's about the water. It's about the water crisis that we have. When Jamarl mentioned Michigan, the first thing I think about is water, regarding how we can start something on the ground floor. It's water. The water in Michigan, they're cutting off older people's water, and then they're telling they're making those old people, they're classifying them as mentally incapacitated, and then doing whatever they want to them. So it's about the water, and I wonder tonight at the debate if someone will ask about the water question, about the fact that in Flint, Michigan, they're saying that there's lead in the water, which is a slightly different issue. But if there's lead in the water in Flint, Michigan, why wouldn't there be lead in the water every other city that was built where the pipes were built prior or equal to the same date?
There are in plenty of cities. In plenty of cities, there are. If I am not mistaken, I could be wrong on this, but there were some cities that did a test, found it, and it was like, whoa, I don't want to touch that. Like, there has to be, right? I mean, just by almost definition, there has to be. You have old pipes, you have a declining system infrastructure. Yeah, those things should be tested. I agree with you, Michael.
I don't know that Biden would use this against Trump, though. I mean, this I think first came to the public's attention during the Obama administration. So I think if Biden were to bring this up during the debates, the assumption here would be, why didn't you guys take care of it? Or at least Trump could I don't know if Trump would ask that.
Well,
but,
Biden can't bring that up. Biden can't bring that up. I mean, Obama went to Michigan, drunk the water, as if everything's great, folks. And, the crowd was shocked by and aghast by that, because it was basically, you had a public that basically said, this is a problem. You had a government that basically caused that problem. You had a federal government under Obama. Many of those people, African Americans, were horrified by his basically put off response. Snyder, that guy is actually backing Joe Biden now. So I don't think Joe Biden wants to bring this up, because this is not going to look good for one Joe Biden and the Obama administration. I agree with you, Shane.
All right, let's go to our next call. Michael from Silver Spring, thank you for the call. We've got Tarif calling in from New Orleans. Tarif, you're on the line. What's going on?
Good morning, gentlemen. First, I'd like to say free Julian Assange. He need our help, and please donate to his case. Bert Kreischer, the comedian, he put out a tweet talking about, which people would he want to go with, Biden or Trump. Is a little online voting thing. Y'all go out and vote on the online thing. The thing dealing with Trump and Biden, when they debate tonight, I think Biden, he won't look that bad. How the way you speak, just like he did with Bernie Sanders. Even though Bernie Sanders had a chance to really go dig into him, Bernie Sanders, I think, helped him, but not really digging into him. Trump is going to dig into him, but how the way is going to be structured, the debate tonight, the questions is actually going to benefit Biden. So Trump going to have to find a way around those questions to ask him different questions to get him frustrated. That's all I want to say.
What do you think he's going to say? What do you think those questions are going to be, Tarif?
Well, to be honest with you, the COVID-19 thing, I mean, that's really going to hurt. I mean, I feel to believe it's going to hurt Trump. It's going to hurt him. And Trump, like you said, Jamal, is the law and order candidate. He can't bring up certain things. Well, I mean, what did he bring up Antifa? I don't know.
But can he, though? I mean, think about Joe Biden's record. I mean, Shane, for you too. Think about what Joe Biden has done over the course of his life. And most of that time was spent in Congress working with one person after the next to put people in prison or to undermine the finances of the American population. Go back, look at the bankruptcy bill. I mean, all of these people who want to file bankruptcy because of their school loans, thank Joe Biden for his protection in regards to like the credit card industry and whatnot. I guess I'm saying Joe Biden is weak on law and order, but not for the reasons that people think. Not because he's weak in the sense of putting policy. It's more so he's weak in the sense that he has been spending his career locking people up. Like, he's been putting people in cages. He called it the Biden crime bill. There's videos that you can watch where Joe Biden is chastising Ronald Reagan for not executing enough people. I mean, come on. Come on. It's insane. So it's a weird mix, right? Trump is calling himself the law and order candidate. Is there a way to dance between the raindrops where you make this attack on Joe Biden that he is simultaneously weak on crime, but also that the criminal laws and the bills that have been put in place are that people have been complaining about in regards to jail, that Biden is also responsible? Or is there no way to do that? I mean, because to me, it would have been far better to attack Joe Biden on law and order from the standpoint of him putting people in cages and Donald Trump trying to get those people out. But Trump didn't do that. What do you think, Shane? I mean, is there a way to play this that works? Or you just stay away from it and just some law and order candidate, keep it simple, avoid the nuance?
I mean, the other question here is exactly what the vector, how this would get introduced, how this would be introduced to the conversation. Right now, again, the topics, the coronavirus, the economy, the Supreme Court, the election, and election integrity. I think that Trump's probably going to get hit hardest on that last one, simply because he's been questioning election integrity, and many people have been questioning his recent statements about whether or not he would accept the Democrats winning. That's a pretty darn big coup. I mean, we were talking earlier about you were saying Democrats were calling the immediate rush to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg a coup. The only sense in which that might, and I don't see that, to be clear, as in any sense a coup. The only sense in which that might relate to it, of course, is that Trump has just recently said that he didn't say that he would accept, the Democrats winning. Biden can hit him on that hard. I mean, that's a pretty condemnation-worthy thing to be hit on. So on that issue, I could see him getting hit. It's just with the law and order thing, I don't know how that would get introduced. Maybe in future debates, maybe if somebody brings it in from left field, but I'd guess that Chris Wallace would try to rein the conversation back in.
Let me ask you this, Shane. If he honestly believed that the election might be rigged, should you accept it? And this is a conceptual thing because Trump is full of it. But if you honestly believed and you were a candidate that they could have potentially cheat you, should you say that? Like, for example, because I think of this from the lens of Sanders, and I know these two are two different people. Sanders said, I would accept the results regardless of what happens, basically. You can cheat me, you can slap me, you can punch me, you can call my supporters bad names. I'm still going to accept the results. I thought, that's horrible. Now, for a president to do it, is there, what's my leeway here? Is it just that these are different people and one person just lies remorselessly and et cetera? But I do think there's something to be said that I don't know if I would accept it. I don't know if I would say in advance, I would accept the election results, even if I think I was cheated. I mean, the catch becomes, the cheating part. That's where it gets dodgy. But Tarif, thank you for the call. We have one more. Jeff from Kansas City. Jeff, what's going on?
Hey, gentlemen. We need to realize this isn't a debate. We're calling it a debate, but the degenerate of the generation of society and these leaders. A debate used to be something highly intelligent. I'm going to express myself. This is why I believe what I believe in. And the level of integrity was a lot better than what it is now. This is just going to be a mudslinging contest. Who can insult the person the most? And they don't really, neither of those candidates have the best interests of America at hand. And that's what it's turned into. Our leadership, if you want to call it that, doesn't have integrity like they used to. It never was perfect, but this is bad, man. Whether it's Trump or Biden, there's nothing good coming from this. Doesn't matter what happened in November. It's going to be an 8.9 on the Richter scale, or it's going to be 11.0 on a Richter scale. That's what it's going to come down to. And my last comment is the gentleman that you had on your guest speaker, people of color, the biggest issue we have is not to defund the police, because you need order. Make no doubt about it. You need somebody to enforce order. Right is right, wrong is wrong, regardless of color. The problem is at the highest level of the justice system is the perception and the application of there's a higher order class of citizens, and then there's a lower order class of citizens. And the justice and the way that is administered reflect that. That's the biggest problem that people of color have with this. Not defund the police, because we need the police. Definitely need the police. It's when you do something wrong, what's the accountability factor of it? And the president, whether it's Mr. Trump or Mr. Biden that's coming up in November, can help that by saying something like this. I'm going to pass a executive order. If you caught killing someone, regardless of color, and they're unarmed, I don't care what law is passed in that state, we're going to prosecute you. When people see that, that'll start to change, because the temperament and the spirit of the justice system is wrong. You need the police. That's all I have to say.
Jeff, I think that's a good point.
Wait, Jeff, real quick question. Real quick question though, Jeff. When you say he should pass that executive order, and it would basically, and if you kill somebody, no matter what color you are, what color they are, if you kill somebody, you should be prosecuted for that. Are you including police in that?
I'm talking specifically about the police. Like, this is what I mean. Like the Louisville, Kentucky incident. Okay, even though the law said you could do that, we all know the law is wrong. And the law has been written to favor certain people, certain color, the police department, and so on. So if you're a policeman, if you kill somebody unarmed, now if you wrestle with the police, I won't argue with that, because that's something you pretty much can't do, depending on how that went down. But if the police shoot and kill somebody that's unarmed, hands is up in the air, or the incident that happened in Dallas with the female cop a few years ago, you're going into somebody's apartment or house, and you're guilty, you need to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. We don't care what the local law says or the state law. Trump should or Biden should pass an executive order. If you're guilty of this and we got you, you're going to be prosecuted. And it won't be what's going to happen to this cop in Louisville. You may get 5 years. No, you're going to do 25 to 30 years easily. And that will start to curb some of this nonsense what's going on with here. Yes, I'm specifically talking about the police.
I think, thank you for the call. I think that would blow people's minds. I'll be honest. I don't see Trump doing that. I think if Trump were to do that, it would be incredible watching the establishment left doing the gymnastics they'd have to do, trying to condemn Trump for passing that executive order. I don't see him doing that, though. The qualified immunity thing is, as far as I can tell, that's become a big bone of contention here, and it seems like the right has definitely fallen down on their side of that argument. What's your take, though, Jamarl?
No, you're right. I don't see either. But I think his point wasn't necessarily would they do it. I think his point is that they should do it. And speaking to that, Breonna Taylor, grand jury, one of the members of that particular grand jury basically comes out and says they want the recordings to be made public. And so it's like, I get where he's coming from. So good call. I appreciate the call, man. All right, let's do this. Let's take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan and Pete and Jemmy. Peter the Tech Guy and Jemmy, the author of Hail Mary, the Perfect Protestant, and a host of Your Prayer Intentions, airing on WQPH 89.3 in Shirley, Fitchburg, Massachusetts, Saturdays at noon Eastern. Pete, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing very well, and if you don't mind me throwing a shameful plug in as well, that my weekly podcast on politics, the Tech Guy Off the Radio No Frills podcast, is every Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, unless I am called into work. Then I move it up to 11.
No shame in that at all, Pete. Thank you for joining us. All right, we're talking about a couple of things today. I suppose we'll start here. What did you think about the New York Times bombshell released this Sunday, Pete?
Well, I hate to say this, but if that's what they call a bombshell, then I'm glad that they're not in charge of our defense. It immediately brought to mind my mainstream media song, which is a parody of the old. I don't know if either of you are old enough to remember the old song "I'm Henry VIII, I Am." You might have seen it from the movie Ghost. And I'm going to embarrass you both by actually singing it very quickly. It goes like this. I'm the MSM I am. I'm going to get Trump. Yes, I am. Thought we had him many times before, but now we've got him. Yep, I'm sure. Oh, drat, we missed him. Next time. I'm the MSM I am. I'm the MSM I am. Second verse, same as the first, and it repeats. We've seen this over and over again. Oh, my God, there's a bombshell. Oh, this bombshell's coming. Oh, my God, what a bombshell. The media says, what a great bombshell. And then nothing happens. I read the story in preparation for being on, and as a guy who owns small businesses, I owned a comic book store back in the 80s, to give you an idea how old I am, back in the days when comic book stores weren't cool. And of course, I have my own small business with the blog and so forth, and writers that I pay and the like. And the Trump stuff is funny. He only paid $750, but he gave $1 million in advance over here. Oh, he had losses and took deductions. Anyone who's ever run a business knows this. And granted, a lot of people haven't run a business, and there's plenty of talking points that come out of it. But it's going to be a dud. What surprised me, frankly, though, was that it broke through it all, because I thought the Amy Coney Barrett nomination and Ginsburg death would really kill everything else. But because it looks like the nomination's a fait accompli, then it gives a little space for this kind of thing.
I agree with you. Kind of. I mean, don't get me wrong. Some of this stuff comes across potentially illegal. I mean, I don't think all of these things are just regular small business things or people who own a small business. They're trying to depreciate your assets, or for that matter, the consulting stuff. I mean, look, I think the issue is it legal or not? And if it's legal, then the issue is not Trump at that point. On the second point, we already knew that Trump had lost $1 billion. Like, so some of the stuff wasn't necessarily shocking. I mean, some of the stuff had already been revealed. So it's like, it looks bad, but I don't know if it matters. Like, and that's the issue of the bombshell. When a bombshell goes off, you would think that a bombshell, takes out a lot of people. But I don't know if this matters. Like, do you think that people who back Trump and support Trump look at this and say, that guy got away without paying taxes despite how rich he is, or federal taxes, I should say, so I'm not going to back him? I just don't buy that line of thought.
Frankly, with Donald Trump in general, it's sort of like there's a local pizza place where I live called Espresso's Pizza, and everyone has a definite opinion on it. You either love it or you hate it. There's no middle ground here on that pizza. It's either too sweet or everyone loves it. Donald Trump is pretty much the same way. The people who this story will excite the people who think, oh my God, we're going to get Trump. We're going to get Trump. But the Trump supporters are not going to be excited about it, especially since in 2016 he explicitly acknowledged that he used a $916 million loss from his income tax to carry things forward. But the big thing in terms of legality, I mean, let's not forget that from 2008 to 2016, there was an administration led by Barack Obama. And let's say there was not a lot of love lost between the two of them. And if there was something illegal, does anyone actually believe that if there was something illegal in Trump's taxes, that the Obama administration would not have pounced? I mean, to me, that's the thing. The fact that the Obama administration never indicted Trump on something with years of taxes there. If they had something on him, they would have gone after him.
How would Obama have gone after Trump?
That's just common sense.
No, wait. Why would Obama have gone after Trump? And why would he have singled Trump's
Trump,
tax
well,
returns
remember the question about the birther stuff that was going on? I think it was 2012 that stuff was going on.
I remember, yeah.
I mean, there was no love lost between these guys. And frankly, given how some of the Tea Party people were treated by the IRS, the idea that they would have let Trump, especially of Trump that they believed was a threat.
Come on. It was liberal groups. Wait. It was liberal groups and Tea Party groups. It wasn't just one or the other. It was both. And it wasn't a situation where they...
I had interesting issues with my own taxes at that time, and I had never had a problem with my taxes for years. I know people who were actually audited who were involved in the Tea Party movement because I was covering the Tea Party at the time. Remember, actually, you probably don't know this.
But there's a lot between the IRS and the government because of Nixon, if I'm not mistaken. It's not being used as a punitive tool. I don't necessarily buy that that's being used as a punitive, and I certainly don't buy that Obama, who wouldn't even go to bat for his own Supreme Court pick, was going to somehow move the federal government around to go after what he considered an opponent. I just don't buy that.
But it's not even a question of that. The point I'm making is if there was illegality, I mean, if it's one thing to try and mess with someone's taxes, it's another thing if there's illegality, you have a cause to go after them.
I know, but how would
if there was illegality, they would have gone after. It wouldn't have been a problem to go after Trump.
But how would Obama have known what was in Trump's taxes?
Yeah, that's what I mean about the taxes. If there was something illegal in Trump's taxes, I mean, it's possible to spin this a particular way. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, the Democrats had an ad out literally hours later comparing what a teacher pays in taxes to the Trump 750, which has become their go-to number. And people can make whatever judgment they want of, people should be paying more taxes. Here in Massachusetts, we actually have a law that allows people to pay a higher tax rate if they want to. When they rolled back the taxes as a concession, they allowed a higher tax rate. And there are usually about 1,000 people every year who voluntarily pay the higher tax rate. But I'm talking about actual illegalities. If there was illegalities, that would have been it. They would have gone after him for the illegalities. I mean, that's.
I think Jamarl's point here is how would they have known? How would they have had access to it?
How did the New York Times get access to this? I mean, tax
seems like they were leaked.
Are supposed to be confidential, and not release someone's tax returns unless they voluntarily release them. My tax returns, your tax returns, don't go to the press. And one of the funniest things about the New York Times story, and frankly, Brian Seltzer from CNN, when people were arguing this is a violation of if somebody who had Trump's tax forms gave them to the New York Times, that's a violation of law. In fact, and the Times story said, well, the people who had these documents were able to legally possess them. Well, a bank teller can legally hold millions of dollars that belong to somebody else, but if they give them away to a person who it doesn't belong to, that's a violation of law. Again, the story itself, it's not uninteresting in the sense that if you want to know how a large company tried to avoid taxes, because we all try and avoid taxes. Nobody wants to pay more taxes than they have to, except for, like I said, the 1,000 people in Massachusetts every year. But in that regard, it is interesting if you're a geeky person. Like I can be geeky, so that part is interesting. But in terms of changing votes, I mean, I doubt it.
I have a hard time believing this changes votes also. I agree with you on that part. I don't agree with you on the Obama stuff. There's a block between the executive branch being able to get their hands on people's taxes. So I don't buy that Obama randomly could get his hands on Trump's taxes and then attack Trump. I don't buy that at all. This is the same guy when a friend of his, Louis Gates, get pulled out of he's at his own house and gets arrested.
I remember.
Do you remember that? And Obama comes out and says, let's have a beer summit. And you're telling me that that guy is going to be the same guy that's so malicious he's going to go after Trump and somehow get his hands on his tax returns illegally? I don't buy that in the least.
I'm saying that if there was illegality in Trump's tax returns, the IRS in the Obama administration would have charged him criminally.
The IRS would have charged him.
That's just common sense.
No. That's not.
If there was some there,
the IRS
they would have gone after.
Would have charged him. Obama wouldn't have had anything to do with it. My issue is
the IRS.
My issue is, I can agree with you with the notion that there might not be illegality in Trump's taxes, and that the IRS would have went after him to a point. I mean, the IRS, because they've been defunded over the course of the years, have stopped or have gone after these things less. Not stopped, but they've gone after them less. So they don't have the resources to go after people with these kind of huge forms, like these huge businesses, multiple businesses and everything else. So they ended up going after people who are big fish like Trump and people who are small fish like Shane and I or you at the same levels. So it's not entirely flat fact that if there was something legal, they would have went after him. But it is true that, this is probably normal. And that's unfortunate. And whether it's unfortunate or not,
that's
I don't
actually
think it
a very
impacts
good
Trump.
point. That's a very good point in the sense that the problem with the tax laws in general, I actually do my own taxes, which is very unusual. My mother had always done her own taxes, and she showed me how to, because my mother used to do accounting and the like. So I do my own taxes. I don't send them out. And the tax code can be very, very challenging. And if you're going through taxes, why am I adding this and subtracting this and adding this and subtracting this? It can actually make your head spin a little bit if you're not used to it. And it would be very nice if the tax code was simpler. I had actually visited a tax office when I had my old radio show, The Tech Guy on the Radio, and they had an original tax form from the first year, and it was like 6 lines, and people could understand it. And one of the weaknesses of our tax code in general is that you keep having modifications, and part of those modifications were to encourage certain behavior, but others were to reward friends, and you'd have to do convoluted things to get those kind of things through. And the more complicated a tax code is, the easier it is to hide favors or to reward people that you want to reward and so forth. And I think
that holds true for the law more generally. It's obscurity through complexity, where basically it rewards people if you have a legal team to decipher this stuff. If you have accountants, a team of accountants to pour through the reams of documents you have to pour through, once you've reached a certain level of success or whatever, it rewards those who are already in power. I hear what you're saying there, definitely, Pete.
And there's one other thing about it is that no two people. My brother used to work at the Massachusetts tax office. He was an auditor, and of course, we're talking about Massachusetts state taxes. And when I was curious about a deduction, because I want to do my taxes legally. My parents always told me, because they had bars and small businesses, they always said to me, Peter, always pay the government first, because the government can grab and then you have to sue them. Other people have to sue you before they can come after you for your money. And I asked him about a deduction. I said, my reading of this is I can do this, but I'm not positive about it. And I asked him, what does the law say? And he said, that can be interpreted either way. So feel free to interpret it in your favor. And that's another thing. It's sometimes the tax rules are so obscure is that you can have 3 different accountants look at something and come up with 3 different results, and none of them are illegitimate because it can be interpreted this way, it can be interpreted that way. And that's, I would really like to see a simpler tax laws. And one of the things I dislike about...
Wait, Peter, let's do this.
We've got to go to a break. Let's come back. Yeah, we're going to go into a break right now. We'll be back. We're joined by Pete and Jemmy. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. We'll be right back.
Fault Lines. We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan and our guest, Pete and Jemmy. We were talking about Trump's tax returns in the last segment. Pete, is it cool with you if we actually sort of segue and start talking about the protests?
Ask me anything you like. You were kind enough to have me. The least I can do is accommodate you.
Hey, you're kind enough to join us, and thank you for accommodating us. Yeah, hopefully the listeners stay tuned as well. All right. Here's the thing. Months of protests, a resurgence of protests in the last couple of weeks following the Breonna Taylor decision, the grand jury over the killing of Breonna Taylor. Just broadly, I'll start here. I don't know that we've talked about this before. What's your take on what's been going on in recent months?
In terms, it depends on how you want me to discuss it. I think electorally, it's been an earthquake. I think the Minneapolis stuff was big electorally, but Kenosha, Knoxville, and Lancaster, I think, were the final nail in the coffin for the Democrats, in the sense that as long as you had violence confined to places like Seattle and Portland, where it's considered far away, it's sort of like Berkeley in the sense that it's considered so far left that, this is a weird place, so weird things happen there. That's one thing. But once it started when it happened in Kenosha, when it happened in Lancaster, when it happened in Louisville, people who are not in places like that say to themselves, if that can happen there, it can happen here. And once that happened, it can that changes votes, and I think that that's going to be the thing that puts, even more than the economy in general. I think that the protests / riots are the thing that are going to put Trump over the top.
Let me ask you this real quick, Peter. I apologize for interrupting, but let me ask you this: why do people? And I don't know the answer to this. Usually, when I ask a question, I already know the answer. But why do people assume that the people who are protesting, or for that matter, rioting, are Democrats? I never understood that. Like, for example, because in many other places, it's white populations. Like Oregon, for example, it's a white population.
It's very white place.
Why is it the assumption that the people who are protesting or rioting, I mean, they're black, white, gay, straight, everything in between. Why is the assumption that they're Democrats?
Probably because of the anti-police stances. The conservatives tend to support police, partially because of the slogans that are being used, and partially because of the way, for example, that the media covered this stuff. I mean, we literally had months where when things were going on daily in Seattle or daily in Portland, the media was pretending none of this was happening. And it wasn't until, I think, when the president had his first small rally in Oklahoma, I think it was Oklahoma, Tulsa, I'm sorry, I stand corrected, and brought that up, then it got a little bit of air. The way the media has reacted, the way the Democrats have reacted to this stuff, gives you the idea that these are Democrats. You don't see a whole lot of MAGA hats at these events.
Jamarl, don't you think it's fair? Maybe even if not Democrats, it's pretty clear that the protesters, and including a lot of the rioters, are people on the left, right? I mean, isn't that the whole idea here?
I think that's fair, but Democrats, to me, that's something slightly different.
But in fairness, they're farther left than most, in my opinion, mainstream Democrats. I think most mainstream Democrats, because remember, I was a Democrat until about 1992, 93, until became independent, then became Republican, then left the Republican Party, and I'm what's called in Massachusetts unenrolled. I'm not enrolled in either party. They're more to the extreme than the average Democrat. I think if you talk to the average Democrat, they may have issues with police. Like no-knock raids are always inherently a problem. You should, as a general rule, I don't like the idea of a no-knock raid. I don't like the idea of, you don't want to give police too much power. You need to give them enough power to enforce the law, because that's really what police are there, to enforce the law, so the average person, so you don't have a bunch of people with clubs enforcing the law. But you also have to be careful. And there's sometimes, like the Breonna Taylor case, the sad thing about that case is that the fellow who shot first, he had a legal firearm. He doesn't know these guys, what these guys coming in are. Maybe he hears the police saying that the police, maybe he doesn't. But he also knows that his girlfriend used to date a drug dealer who might be jealous. And if I was dating a woman who used to date a drug dealer who might be jealous, I'd carry a gun too and be really nervous if someone knocked on that door.
Beyond that point, I mean, I don't even know is it a flat fact that he shot that cop? Do we know that? I mean, was that something that was introduced? And even beyond that point, you're right.
Yeah, but I don't even blame the guy. I don't blame the guy at all. Yeah. I think the sad thing about the Breonna Taylor case is when I looking at the facts from the grand jury, the cop who fired randomly without any sight, I mean, that guy's properly indicted. The guy who fired, not sure what's coming in late at night, I don't blame the guy for shooting. The police officers who were shot at, I don't blame them for shooting because they've been shot at, one of them's hit. And the fact that Ms. Taylor was killed in this is horrible. But again, that's the thing about no-knock raids and so forth, that type of thing. I'm not comfortable with it. I don't see a great alternative, but I'm not comfortable with it. And as a general rule, you don't want it. You respect the police. You like the police. But you don't want to give anybody too much power over you, especially when those people are licensed to commit violence theoretically in your name because they work for the city. And policing is a very hard job because you never know. You with a traffic stop, you never know if you're going to come home from it. You have to be well trained.
But they chose to do the job.
But you don't want to give more power. You don't want to give too much power to any police force because they literally have the right of life or death over you.
Well, right.
You want to protect police, but you don't
think police are given too much power at this point? Well. Do you the implication here? Pete, do you see police as having been given too much power at this point? Is that sort of? I'm taking that as the implication of what you were just saying. Just getting it clear, though. Do you see?
I believe in scrutiny of police, but I don't believe in demonization of police. I think we've crossed the line from scrutiny to demonization over the last several months. I think the idea of defunding police departments is patently absurd. I'm with Charles Barkley on this, who was saying that how ridiculous that was because the communities that need policing the most are the ones that are being most affected by police holding back. And frankly, if I'm a police officer and I'm afraid I'm going to get charged, I'm going to lose my pension or something, I'm going to hold back too, because that's self-preservation, but it defeats the whole purpose of having police. You have to have...
Well, wait, Peter,
police
come
have
on.
to have
That's
cooperation with citizenry, and the citizenry have to be able to have trust in police.
Yes, but
for
that's...
police
But
to work. And if it doesn't work, then you're going to get vigilantism, which is bad.
But
the whole idea of having police departments was to replace vigilantism.
But the cops still should think twice. I mean, because think about the situation that you have right now. You have 1,000 killings a year by cops, and 1% get prosecuted. Now, there's no way you're going to tell me that 99% of those killings were fair games. It's not that. There's no accountability in it. And so, yeah, they're more apt to use their weapons. I mean, look at America in comparison to other nations around the world. It is appalling. The number of killings that we have, the number of people we put into our prisons. I mean, the way that they collect fines off of the poor in order to keep the local governments afloat. I mean, this stuff is atrocious. I mean, I guess my point is, it's not an issue of demonizing the police. It's a point of making the point to saying there's a problem with this, and the killings and the people who are protesting is secondary to that. Meaning, they're not out there because they love it. They're not out there because this is just the thing they want to do on the weekends. They're out there because there's a certain amount of consternation in the various communities. Yes, African Americans want to be able to use cops. No, they don't necessarily want to be tracked, killed, shot, abused, or for that matter, taken advantage of because of their station. And that's the issue. That's the crux. The defund the police thing, would you agree with me that, look, I agree with you. The term of it or the naming of it is problematic. But at the root of it, basically they're saying there are other ways to deal with violence and crime in communities. And some of those ways deal with investing in the communities and not overly investing in the cops. Meaning if you can organically get rid of cops just based on lowering crime and violence in various communities, then you should do so. But they use defund the police, which is to some degree unfortunate because people immediately, go to the notion of abolishing cops and they said this is crazy and so forth. But do you understand that logic, though? The idea that you can lower crime and violence.
I understand the logic. I just don't agree with it because, again, you're dealing with human nature. The idea that you have predators who prey on people, this is not...
But why? Why do those predators prey on people? I mean, look, there are going to be a percentage of people who are just horrible. Take them off to the side for the moment. And let's get into, the statistics of it all. In areas that are dirt poor or that have issues of, let's say, unemployment and so forth, you tend to have higher crime and you tend to have higher violence. It's because it becomes a rational act. If Shane is at his house, Shane has no impetus at all to go and buy crack and sell it. Because Shane, for the most part, is doing the job. He probably has a girlfriend somewhere. He has a house. He has a dog or whatever. He has a life. The moment that you take away that life and you put people in horrible situations, then you're going to have a percentage of those people who take drugs in order to deal. You're going to have a percentage of those people who may be off themselves because they don't necessarily want to deal with the environment that they find themselves. And you're going to have a percentage that says, I am going to get by however I need to get by, even if that means sticking up somebody else or selling a product or doing something illegal. I guess my point is...
I would argue that...
Wait, do you agree with that?
If that was the case,
then during the... Do you agree that...
No,
that
because
poverty...
if that was the case, then we would have seen ridiculous crime rates during the Great Depression where there was massive unemployment and almost no relief for people. Yet you didn't see
that's
the
what I
same
bring up
type
too.
of crime.
But
I think the biggest driver of crime, in my opinion, today, in terms of people in general, is fatherlessness.
30.
If you have an intact family with a father and mother,
we've got to cut it. We've got to go. Thank you so much for joining us. That was the voice of Pete and Jemmy, author of Hail Mary, the Perfect Protestant, and host of Your Prayer Intentions. We'll be back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. Back with headlines in just a minute.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
And we're back, coming to you live from the divided states of America. In the politically independent corner, I am your investigative political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, ever vigilant, the last man on the wall, with my co-host, Shane Stranahan, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, we're doing the headlines then. In, say, 10, 15 minutes, we'll be taking calls. 202-521-1320 is the number. Do feel free to call in again, 202-521-1320. In the news, President Trump and Joe Biden will debate tonight in Cleveland in the first of three such debates occurring within the next few weeks. The candidates will be discussing the coronavirus, the economy, the Supreme Court, and election integrity. Not on the list of topics, Black Lives Matter, foreign policy, and climate change. Moderator Chris Wallace has said he will not be fact-checking the candidates' answers. The debate will begin at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. More than 1 million deaths have now been attributed to the coronavirus in the worst yet grim milestone we have faced. The World Bank has warned that developing countries in East Asia and the Pacific will likely see poverty rise for the first time in 20 years, with 5 million people likely to fall back into poverty due to measures used to contain the coronavirus outbreak. House Democrats have released a new $2.2 trillion coronavirus relief bill. That's a trimmed-down version of a $3.4 trillion bill that passed the House back in May. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has said that the new bill reflects what she calls Democrats' willingness to work with Republicans on a coronavirus relief package. The new bill includes money for the Paycheck Protection Program for providing loans to small businesses, funds for state and local governments, and another round of direct payments to individuals. The bill would also revive weekly federal unemployment benefits, which expired at the end of July. California Governor Gavin Newsom has declared emergencies for 3 counties due to the rapid growth of 2 new fires. The Glass Fire, which has consumed 56 square miles since Sunday, and the Zog Fire, you heard that right, the Zog Fire in Northern California, which has burned over 48 square miles so far. The National Weather Service says Northern California continues to see excessive heat today. Police departments in several cities reported 911 outages in their emergency call systems on Monday. It's still unclear what caused the disruptions, which have resolved. Some outages were a few minutes, while some lasted for up to half an hour. Departments in Arizona, Colorado, and Minnesota reported the issue. The human rights group Amnesty International has said that it's been forced to suspend work in India after saying it has faced reprisals from the Indian government and frozen bank accounts there. In 2016, the Indian government accused Amnesty International of sedition and has said that it's been investigating the organization for breaking foreign funding laws. Fighting has continued for a third night between Armenian and Azerbaijani forces over the disputed region of Nagorno-Karabakh. The UN Security Council plans to convene later today in order to address the ongoing clashes. Turkey, meanwhile, has today said that it is ready to support Azerbaijan in both its negotiations and combat with Armenia. And The Guardian has just reported that Turkey hired rebels from Syria to fight for Azerbaijan in its conflict with Armenia. Azerbaijan has claimed that Armenian forces have lost 550 servicemen. Armenia has reported only several dozen casualties and has said that Azerbaijan has lost hundreds so far. The World Bank has warned, oh, you know what? Already covered this one. Those are the news. That's the headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. You know, this is really trivial, but the Zog Fire, I've just hesitated over that. It's literally spelled Z-O-G-G, which you would think of as like the name of a villain from like an 80s cartoon movie or something like that. Zog. I don't know if you.
That's funny.
I don't know if you're familiar with that class of movies.
Not entirely.
I am. Anyway.
Let me inject something.
Wizards.
So
that's a classic. Go for it, Jamarl.
This is a history. History.com. Violent crime rates may have risen at first during the Depression, talking about the Great Depression. In 1993, homicide mortality rate hit a high for the century until that point. I think it says 9.7% per 100,000 people. But the trend did not continue throughout the decade. Look, we can have sociologists on, we can have economists on, and they will tell you the same thing. Crime is intimately related to poverty. And it's not because they're bad people. It has more to do with the environment itself, determining the behavior of the individual. And some of those people, again, turn it on themselves, but some of those people turn it outside of themselves. So, we can have other people on to make that to have that question. We can even have people on for the history to kind of have that conversation about crime rates versus poverty or crime rates and that type of stuff. But at this point, I don't even think that's shocking. Like, if you are dirt poor, let's say you're living in a bad community, you have certain choices. How do you make ends meet? That's your basic issue. And I'm sorry, if you have pathways for people to do that and make their ends meet, you will have less crime. It's like recycling or trash cans. In areas where you have trash cans, people tend to use them. In areas you don't, they tend to throw the stuff on the ground. It's path of least resistance. That's kind of the point I guess I'm trying to make. But either way, Igami is a great guest, and I always love him when he comes on. I was looking, he was responding on Twitter, and he said, like, they're always shocked at my responses. And I responded, I was like, sometimes pleasantly. He's a great guest. He's very affable, easy to talk to, and I always used to make the thing tell Garland. I was like, dude, even when people disagree with you, they still leave the argument thinking, I like that guy. I think Peter's in a similar way. So it was a great conversation, good back and forth, and this is indeed fault lines. So those things are to some degree.
It's true. Expected. I mean, one quick note here is that arguably what's more correlated with the increase in crime is inequality. It's not crime. It's not poverty. Although of course poverty is correlated with inequality too. If you have local inequality in an economy, then effectively what that means is some people have a lot of stuff. Other people don't have nearly as much stuff. And if there's not some means by which the people who don't have as much stuff can get more stuff, then they're probably going to be driven to take it from the people who have a lot of stuff. And then you get into these conversations about systematic oppression, whether, there are economic, political, whether there are laws in place. We're talking about the tax code. That's one sort of small domain of this. Pete himself brought up the point that the tax code has been overly complicated to benefit the rich, who can navigate it with the help of their lawyers and accountants.
He's 1,000% right.
And he's right about that.
Yeah. That's what I mean. Like the point of view is pleasant. Like sometimes it's surprising, but I don't think he's insane. No, the tax code is a big deal, right? Like if you have a tax code that basically Trump lost $1 billion, and in some weird place he was rewarded for it. Isn't that strange? My mom. I grew up. My mom started working when she was, I think, like 17 or 18. Like she started when she was in high school. She didn't particularly like high school. And so her thing was, I'm going to get a job and I'm going to live my life. Now, that should be adequate for anybody to be able to live their life, just getting a job. She has a kid, me, and making maybe $7 or $8 an hour and having to kind of go through life like that, which these kind of small raises as you kind of go through. Meaning you're almost forced to quit your one job in order to get another job and kind of play the rat race. But if you don't want to do that, if you have no interest in that, then you're kind of stuck at the whims of society and at the edges of it, having a difficult time despite the fact you're not doing anything wrong. And from my own experience, I can see it with my own eyes. It breeds a certain degree of depression. It breeds a certain degree of self-contempt, as if you're blaming yourself for factors that are outside of yourself. All of those things take place. And you have different types of ways that people respond. You have some people who go to crime. You can even see that, where in their heads, this is acceptable because of whatever reason that they come up with. Yeah, I mean, if you're living in this situation, you get a bird's eye view of what you're talking about. And so it's not like I'm saying this out of conjecture, like, I'm just thinking this. It's more so you could see it, you could live it. You could see how people respond in those situations. And so, it's very important, the tax code. And unfortunately for us, what Trump did in that taxes might be entirely legal. Like I'm keep making the point, it's probably normal. You had $300 million or $300 billion a year that is missing, where people are just hiding their wealth? Or you have $7 trillion offshore? Again, where the world's rich basically are hiding their wealth in these tax havens, the Paradise Papers. I guess what people need to realize, if they're horrified by Trump's taxes, oh my God, he didn't pay any. Well, Jeff Bezos or Amazon didn't pay any in federal government taxes. I mean, you have many of these companies that are huge companies that don't pay squat in federal taxes. Trump is not alone. The outrage in this. I know Democrats want to make this specific to Trump. It's not. The $92 million kickback that Donald Trump got was given because of a provision that Obama put in? I mean, for God's sake, he gave 83% of Bush tax cuts and put them through. And so it's like, for all of the consternation that Democrats are having in this, you were also responsible for putting these in that allowed Trump to do what he did with those taxes. The outrage is that what Trump did was probably normal. And, they're not going to talk about it that way. They're going to act, Democrats are going to act like, oh my God, I can't believe this is taking place. It's like, why not? Obama put many of those provisions in place. It's like, so let's be honest when we're talking about this. And in fact, and honestly, Peter made another good point.
Real quick.
Go ahead, Shane.
It's like that scene from Casablanca. I'm shocked that there's gambling happening in this establishment. It's that same idea, but with tax evasion.
Right. I can't believe there's gambling in this establishment. What do you think needs to take place with this? Because my aggravation is that stuff like this comes out and nothing happens. Now, this is Trump stuff, but it should raise a larger conversation about this in general. And the sad part is, do you honestly believe that Joe Biden is going to go in and make any substantial change to change this? No, I don't.
No. I mean, real quick, I think the New York Times should have released this a little bit earlier. Unless everything was sort of miraculously timed and they got the documents and they only had just enough time to review them and then they released them, 2 days coincidentally before a debate. Well, they were sitting on this for who knows how many months, potentially years. That's really the assumption here. If they had it, they should have come out with it earlier. If this is a serious thing that they're worried about, they should have come out with this as soon as possible so that investigators, Letitia James being the big name coming up here, that she would have had more to work on earlier. So, I mean, I'll start with them because they're the institution that released this, but we can criticize the political establishment.
Wait,
Joe
what
Biden,
does it mean, though, that they released it at this moment? Like, does it have meaning?
It's as close to an October surprise as you can get. It's 3 days, 4 days, whatever it is, before the beginning of October, 2 days before the first debate. You see what I'm saying? That it is purely a calculation. It's purely an optical thing to change, from their perspective, how the election goes. And again, it might have some follow-on consequences if Letitia James decides to pursue this. But I think Garland made a decent point, which is if she does, it's going to raise a whole bunch of questions about a whole bunch of other people, Democrats and Republicans, who obviously do this. I mean, again, if the assumption here is that the rich try to minimize their taxes, that's not new. Everybody's known that for much longer than I've been alive.
I agree with you. I don't think this is a bombshell in the way they think it's a bombshell. I think this is one of those things that libs like. I think it's that. But I think the larger conversation, honestly, really is, this is normal. And if the American population has qualms with this, then they need to deal with the fact that this is normal. I mean, they always say, how are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for that plan or this plan? And you find out you have $300 billion that have just basically vanished off the face of the earth where these guys are hiding in the thing. You can pay for it. Even with that $1 billion hidden, you can pay for it. This debate tonight is going to be depressing for me, even though I'm going to watch it. That's the burden I must bear for this show. But I don't have any, it's probably going to be like Trump and Clinton, where there's not really a there. I mean, it depends on what Biden does. Biden, for all we know, may come out with this kind of weird expansionist politics. Like, Donald Trump did this, but I am going to solve this problem and that problem. But I'm doubting it. I think he probably goes in and just attacks Trump and ignores all of the problems and the vagaries that are taking place in our society right now. Whether that's the criminal justice system that Joe Biden helped create, whether that's the floods and the fires, whether that's the 30 million out of a job, like whatever that issue is, this is the Great Depression on steroids. And it doesn't seem like either political actor cares. Am I saying, let's do this. Let's take a break. And we can come back and I'll let you respond to that. But it's a horrible time in this country. And you would think that with so many disasters, you would think that there would be competent leadership. Now, to me, I think of an FDR moment. Because to me, I think their crisis, this is an opportunity for somebody in politics to excel and set the name for themselves in record books for the years to come, for decades to come. But that's not what you get. And unfortunately, I don't see either of these people as being able to do that. Part and parcel to my blame on that are lefties. And I know that sounds weird. Why are you kicking lefties? Or for that matter, African Americans? Because in my head, those two groups are infinitely necessary for Democrats to get elected. And in spite of them being infinitely necessary, they take a warped point of view that their job is just to get the guy elected because they're scared, as opposed to holding them accountable. Let's take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back momentarily.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines, we divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. We're taking calls 202-521-1320. Again, 202-521-1320. Jamarl, I'm going to out you, but this is just you kind of gave it to me, man. So you're buying a sauna, and you should be getting there today.
I am.
That sounds nice.
It's medical,
That's
believe
awesome.
it or not. So when I was traveling, when my wife and I were traveling, we were jumping from place to place. Now, as you guys know, I do dialysis treatments, which means that I can only go for X amount of time before I die. And even in that, it gets pretty grim over the course of, let's say, like 8-9 days, etc. At worst, you may be able to push it for 7 days. But after that, you're probably going to be feeling pretty miserable. I think when we got married, I think I might went for 9. And that's probably the worst of it. It wasn't too bad. Here's the catch. When you're doing that, you're not going to be able to get all the treatments because in America, you have to pay for it. And as an American, the moment that you stop paying your doctor, that the guy is no longer your doctor. Now, if you were in Germany or France or whatever, when you were traveling, the fact that you have medical treatments goes with you because those countries care. So in our case, we have to pay for it. Depending on where you are, the price gets radically different. So say in Poland, $100. And you're in London, like 500, 600, which means you're not going to get any dialysis in London. What you will do is try to get to the cheaper places. And what you will do is expand your time frame. So if you are, let's say, in London, well, you might be able to push it for 5 days, but at some point you're going to have to take a flight to get to somewhere cheaper. So saunas minded the gap. This worked in most places because most places, especially in Europe, had them where you could go, you could sit there, you could sweat for a certain amount of time, get the potassium, get the bad stuff out of you, and then move on. Germany was different. Germany has a thing with nudity. Now, because Germany has a thing with nudity, they are perfectly okay just going in the buff. And so in every other country, you were expected to have your clothes on to some degree, like your shorts or something like that. Germany, not so much. Germany was in the buff. I walk into a place. I need to get the fluid off. The treatment didn't go all that well in Germany. I go in and they say, hey, we're co-ed. No issue. I'm fine with that. I walk in, I have shorts on. I take my shirt off, which to me is a big deal because that's not something I typically did. I have a lot of scarring and stuff, so I don't tend to do that. And so I'm feeling proud of myself. Yeah, that's right. I'm out here. I don't have a shirt on. Yeah, this is me gripping my, my confidence. And everyone walks in is naked. Even the women. Now, I'm embarrassed, which is weird because I am the one with clothes on and they're not. And dude comes in and he's heating the room up and he's like swirling and they're doing this kind of ritual stuff and it gets so hot, I feel like I'm going to pass out. Now, you can't do that because it looks bad. And so you have to kind of still yourself. And I'm trying not to look at the other people because, there are women there. I am clearly not naked, and it looks like you're a gawker at that point. The moment that everyone leaves, I get up and walk up. I am horrifyingly embarrassed. I go to another sauna, it was the same thing. And in this one, they have very explicit instructions. This is a dome of sorts. This is, I can't think of the name of the place, but it's this weird-looking dome, and it puts you in the mind of a movie that Sean Connery was in. This is an old sci-fi movie, where there's a pool, there's music under the pool, there's lighting and the lasers and stuff going off in the room. You can get drinks, so you can get your alcohol before going into the sun and sitting there sweating. Nakedness, however, is the rule. It's different countries.
That's
things.
Interesting. Wait,
Yeah.
And so real quick, we're a couple of minutes into this, but I just want to be clear.
Go for it.
This is useful because you've had kidney problems, and basically this sweating itself helps you to get some of the toxins out. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Because if you can't if you can't get them out through your kidneys, because under normal circumstances, your body does pretty miraculous things. Your kidney controls like blood pressure, vitamin D absorption, which is just weird and bizarre the way this stuff controls all of these different things, phosphorus, calcium, all sorts of stuff. But one of those major functions is getting out waste material and getting out fluid, because it controls your fluid balance. The moment that you lose your kidneys, you don't have any.
This is like a life.
Good.
This has been a long-term, practically lifelong issue. Yeah, for those, I mean, obviously the vast majority of people listening have been listening. They've been following what's going on. But Jamarl's a brave dude. He's been going through a lot of stuff recently. Recently lost vision in the center of his right eye. I mean, again, hats off to you, man. You've had to deal with a lot of stuff in this life.
Yeah, but that's not choice. There's no reward for endurance. That's just endurance. It's like you get hit by a car. Hey, you were pretty brave for getting hit by that car. I didn't choose getting hit by that car. You just had to deal. Now it's been going on for a while, man. The eye thing is different. That's radically different, and that's disturbing in and of itself. Look, my perspective of the world, going back from when I was younger, was everything dies. There's nothing out there to protect you. There's nothing out there to save you. It's just you and the relationships that you create. Everything dies. And you have a lot of people who would cling to life like grim death. And, it's like, yes, I want to be on that respirator for as long as... No, I don't. Live your life. And to some degree, the fact that everything dies is a freeing experience. If I die in the course of me going on this trip, then fair enough. But I was going to die anyway. Now, the catch and the wrinkle in that is that there are things that happen to you that don't include death. So for me, like, blindness is worse than death. And so the notion of losing any kind of vision is terrifying and goes beyond this just basic thought of everything dies, so let's kind of live your life. Yeah, everything dies, but cripple or being radically crippled is different. And so it's, but that's not bravery. That's just kind of life, that you don't have a choice but to endure, and you endure it the way you endure it. In this case, yeah,
and
this was weird. So
this came out of nowhere, and it seems, I mean, hopefully it went back into nowhere. Hopefully, obviously this doesn't set anything else up. It's just, you're talking about life. You're talking about these larger, more issues. I've had those kinds of thoughts.
No, the moment something happens, it changes.
It's true.
It's different. Like with the kidney failure thing, I came to the conclusion that everything dies because of that. But that gives you a kind of a different outlook on stuff. I think basically they call it a stroke. I mean, but it's a technical stroke in the sense. It's not a brain thing. It's a blood clot just behind the eye that's putting pressure on the optic nerve that's closing the optic nerve, where it killed vision to a portion of the center of the eye. Once it happens, though, you're fair game. It's different. Like it's like you are a bag in the wind. Anything is fair game. Anything can happen. Like I said, you're radically unsafe at any particular moment. And the moment that, like, it's the randomness of it. That's the thing that's always shocking. And so it's like, everything's going fine. Everything's great. Things are under control. And then all of a sudden, bam, you can't see. That quick. Like literally that quick. Like Ron Paul had
You're used to dealing with all your problems. You got so many things that you deal with that any given person deals with, and you can kind of get used to, I have these problems. These are personal problems. My family has these problems. I can sort of deal with those. And you think, okay, this is bad enough. And then something random like this just comes out of the blue.
But you must understand, the kidney failure stuff, I mean, this stuff has been going on for, 25 years. So at this point, it is normal. It's normal. Like, everybody has limitations. But those limitations have caveats. And there are ways that you can push those things depending on imagination, depending on what you actually want to accomplish. Like, for example, when I first went traveling, I was, 30, I believe. My kidney had just failed, and Medicare had just ended. So think of it, I had lost my job, my relationship ended, and I lost my health care all at the same time. And at that point I said, screw it, I'm going to Amsterdam. And I smoked a ton of pot while I was in Amsterdam. I went into Egypt. I went overland into Jordan, taking a flight to Nepal, went bungee jumping in Nepal. Now, all of this is without a kidney, by the way. And the entire time I had to measure the amount of urine production. I had to buy drugs overseas like Lasix or some of the other stuff to try to kind of juice whatever was left in the transplanted kidney. By the time I got to India, I was bad off. I couldn't eat. I hadn't eaten in like weeks. And in my head, I was still saying, all right, book a ticket to Bangkok, get to Japan, get some sushi. Like, that's where my head was. And when my wife and I did it, she would have never allowed me to do anything like that. I mean, some of the stuff was just so dangerous. But look, all sorts of imagination and everything can be brought to bear in trying to do what you want to do. And I met people who would say, God, this happened, and now I can't do X. And I'm like, why can't you do X? Well, because of so-and-so. Yeah, I know, but aren't there ways around that? Well, maybe. Well, if there are ways around it, then there are ways around it. I've had talks with doctors. The guy I talked to in Kenya was a doctor. He says, so where's your next place? He says, when are you going home? I said, 4 or 5 months. And he sat there shocked. And he's like, what do you mean 4 or 5 months? Aren't you on a dialysis patient? I said, well, I do dialysis. I'm not a patient. And it's a distinction in words. I said, well, yeah, we're going to Egypt and then we're going to this place and that place. He's shocked. He sits there, talks to me for an hour, and he says, maybe I'm doing my job wrong. And I said, no, you're not doing your job wrong. It's just, it's up to the person to be able to recognize that their life matters more than the individual circumstance. Meaning, your job as my doctor is to be a whisper in my ear to say, don't die, don't kill yourself. My job as a person is to live my life and take your advice as advice in the context of the whole. Recognizing that bad things can happen. I mean, you're not going to always feel great. You're not going to always be sparkling in the situation, especially when you put to bear what you want. There are things that you give up that go beyond cash. Sometimes what you give up is feeling well. Sometimes what you give up is, not being in the best of situations or best of feeling. But you do that stuff because you want to accomplish something else. And so imagination comes into play, endurance comes into play, and all that stuff. But that's it's just kind of what you bear, what you endure, and what you want. Now, the catch becomes random stuff. And random stuff, like anything else, you're a person. It takes a while to accommodate the loss. And not just accommodate the loss, get accustomed to this. It's like the difference between knowing you're going to get stuck by a needle and getting stuck by a needle. Where it's like, yeah, I understand this randomness. I understand that weird and random things happen at time to time. And being able to accept it, accommodate it, and then move on forward and getting back to that normality of, all right, you're still back to where you were. That's not easy. And especially when it's dealing with something like a vision. But look, a lot of the stuff is just endurance. And it's imagination, it's endurance, it's what you want to accomplish, what you feel the need to accomplish. But at the end of it all, I am not me without this happening. And so I can't even overly gripe at fate, per se. Because who am I without these experiences? And that is a radically, fundamentally different person. Yes, the logic of the individual might still be there, but the logic of the individual is being applied to a different life, which means that would be a fundamentally different person. I am only me.
That's that Nietzschean bit about amor fati.
Yeah.
That's love your fate. That's where my mind. Nietzsche. I don't think he was the first person. I think this goes way a couple thousand years back. But Nietzsche, the German philosopher, amor fati, a Latin phrase he popularized, basically meaning love your fate. This idea of whatever happens, come to accept it, come to love it. Whoever you become as a result of going through these trials. Again, I'm kind of paraphrasing here and extending it in different ways. But this idea of accepting what has happened, accepting the life you've been given, and living it to its fullest. That kind of sounds like what you're saying there, Jamarl.
Kind of. Because you don't have a choice otherwise. Like, what other choice do you have? You live your life. And you, within the context of what's going on with you and your limitations, you try to find what are the caveats of the limitations. And you go. That's all you have. You can sulk. You can sit there and, take it. And I don't blame people for that. People are who they are. It's like, did I choose to play chess? No. Something in me loved it, and I just kind of appropriated it and went with it. So it's not always that the person chooses. There's some things that are just part and parcel to the person. I'm just making the point that oftentimes imagination needs to be brought to bear in order to live the life that you want to live in spite of the limitations that you have. And that's not something that's easy. That's not something I say flippantly. I just say it as that's all you got. Let's do this. Let's take a break. This is kind of a weird, random conversation that got into me. But you guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Catch all the breaking global, political, and economic news as it happens. Sputnik brings an all-star lineup with expert opinion from some of the biggest names in the news today. Noam Chomsky.
Turkey, U.S. ally, their main goal is to attack the Kurds, the one ground force opposing ISIS. And there have been a kind of a funnel for support of ISIS, not officially, but in practice.
Peter Sunde, co-founder of the Pirate Bay.
We don't have any sort of democratic control over the internet. And I think that we're very naive when we think that the internet itself is intrinsically good. It's not. It's just a very neutral technology that is being used for good things, but more and more being used for evil things.
Icelandic Foreign Minister Gunnar Bragi Sveinsson.
We increase activities in the Keflavik airbase, and that has to do with more activities from the Russian Northern Fleet in the ocean around Iceland, and also, of course, these usual flights of the bombers.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
We're the ones that destroyed the government of Libya. We're the ones that, in a pipeline dispute, that helped destroy the government of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. We're the ones who invaded Iraq.
Former U.S. Secretary of Defense William Perry.
The hostile relationship between the United States and Russia today is dangerous for both countries, not because either country would actually want to start a military conflict, but because there's always a danger of blundering.
Sputnik talks to the brightest minds in politics and current affairs to find out what's really happening. Tune in. Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan and Lucy Commissar, investigative journalist focusing on corporate and financial corruption. Lucy, we had you on late last week for only 15 minutes, and I thought we could do with at least another batch, at least twice as long. How are you doing this morning?
Oh, I'm fine, thank you, and I'm glad to be able to talk more about this subject.
It is very important, and for those listening, if you heard last week and you grasped everything that she said, I'm going to apologize in advance because we're going to be doing a retread of a lot of this stuff. Thankfully, even for many of those who were listening, some of this is just so far outside of their bailiwick, their sphere of understanding, that I'm sure even if we go over some of the same material, they'll probably hear it with new ears and hear some new things. Lucy, this has all been spurred, this whole conversation we're having has been spurred by a BuzzFeed release having to do with these FinCEN leaks. A couple of banks took sharp hits. HSBC is the big one that comes to mind, but also Deutsche Bank at the time. Can you please walk us back from the beginning? You were, as far as I can tell, I don't want to mispaint you. You were sharing some of your concerns about the motivations that BuzzFeed had for these leaks, for releasing this, why they were doing it, who they were targeting, the timing of it. Could you please give us a brief breakdown? What do these leaks contain, first of all, and then why, secondarily, why are you a little bit suspicious of them, Lucy?
Well, I want to start with very surprising information that was in one of the articles, and it's about the SARS being used for mass surveillance. Only a minuscule percentage, maybe 1%, if that, or 2% of them are actually examined. According to Michael German, a former FBI special agent who's now a national security and privacy expert, after 9/11, he said, quote, the SAR program, SAR is the suspicious activity reports, which the banks are supposed to file when they get money, an attempt to move money through the bank, and they're suspicious about where it's coming from, where it's going to. He said the SAR program, and that's run by the Treasury, became more about mass surveillance than identifying discrete transactions to disrupt money launderers. Repeat that. It wasn't about money laundering. It was another way of doing surveillance. He said, quote, the data is used like the data from other mass surveillance programs. Find someone you want to get for whatever reason, then sift through the vast troves of data collected to find anything you can hang them with. That is very important, and that was not at the top of the reports that I saw in the mainstream press.
Lucy, can you please just go back to the beginning? Who was saying this, and what was their relationship with this release?
Michael German is quoted in one of the articles, one of the BuzzFeed articles. I was surprised to see that because they didn't take it much further than that. They just quoted that. Because what the article said, quoting him, then it said, in 2017, when U.S. congressional committees began investigating the last presidential election, the 2016 election, they turned to the Treasury Department database, the SARS. They asked for SARS on Deutsche Bank, which had loaned Trump money, Christopher Steele, the former MI6 agent who wrote the so-called Trump dossier, an array of Russian oligarchs, Trump's former campaign chairperson, Paul Manafort, and even a small casino in the Pacific run by a former Trump employee. They were looking for information on more than 200 entities, but the focus was not there was some kind of money laundering problem, maybe because they were going through banks in tax havens like the Isle of Man or Guernsey or Grand Cayman. No, these were all politically connected, and that is a very serious question that this is now being used for mass surveillance. Then the next thing that happened is, question is, where did all these SARS come from? Well, take it back a step. A woman named Natalie Mayflower Soares Edwards, who was a senior official at FinCEN, which is the agency that is in charge, the financial agency of the Treasury Department that is in charge of the SARS. In January, she pleaded guilty to a federal charge that she unlawfully gave SARS to BuzzFeed. And the focus of the SARS that she disclosed illegally, and it mentions, were about Paul Manafort. Richard Gates was another Trump campaign person, the Russian embassy, Maria Butina, who's the Russian woman who was jailed because not reporting herself as a lobbyist when she was trying to get the NRA in some kind of joint operation with the Russians. And Prevezon Alexander, that's not a person. Alexander is the name of a New York City condominium owned by Prevezon, the company that the Justice Department went after. Basically, they were acting as the agent of William Browder because he was trying to get a case going on his alleged that this becomes confusing, 230 million stolen from the Russian treasury had gone through various banks and had been 1.9 million. That is out of 230. He says he had documents that it ended up with this Russian company, Prevezon, and they used it to buy real estate. 2 buildings in New York. That was all a fake because, in effect, he's the guy that stole the money, and that's a whole other story. But that was on the list that Natalie Edwards gave to BuzzFeed. So the question is, whose operation is this? What's the purpose of this? Is this just how did she happen to get these? There are millions of SARS reports that come in every year. And how did she find these? Did she do a Google search into the based on the names Manafort and Prevezon? Was she doing that? This seems to me, again, part of this surveillance. Now, the question is, the BuzzFeed people say that they got this information over a year ago. It took them more than a year to investigate it. That's the same time that Natalie Edwards was doing this. So we don't know whether she's the one who gave them all of this information or not, because also in the report by BuzzFeed, they say that congressional committees were requesting this information about these people, and someone blew the whistle to members of Congress about that. So that's another backstory here, which BuzzFeed did not get into because they probably know the answer and they don't want to tell. But it raises suspicions about whether this whole operation had a backstory and another purpose, and it wasn't about money laundering. It was, as this FBI individual, Michael German, said, it was surveillance and it was about getting people that you're after. And that is a very important part of the story, which has not been focused on in the mainstream media.
But
That's
Michael
remarkable.
German, just to interrupt for a moment, Michael German, the agent, he's saying that it became that way. But are you saying that you think it was the origin of it was to basically spy?
Well,
I mean, basically, it's become another arm of the surveillance system of the United States. That's basically the argument that's being made.
I don't know if it may have started really because of concern about money laundering. But once you have these machines, these tools, the people in charge of them use them, and they never set up an operation to really go after, to investigate. They don't have the staff. It became impossible. Banks would just file, and for their own protection, would file many suspicious reports. It doesn't mean they had to include any information. They're just suspicious. But why are you suspicious? Where did the money come from? What was it supposed to be for? That is never required. So it's really, on both sides, it became a way to say, oh, yes, we're doing something about money laundering, but they're really not. You know why? It's really easy to end money laundering. You end the tax haven system. I years ago, I interviewed Robert Morgenthau. He was a district attorney of New York for over 30 years, from 1975 to 2009. He said the way to stop money laundering is to do the same things that the U.S. does when it doesn't like a bank in some place like North Korea or Syria. All you do is you say, this is now a security threat. Money from this bank, because the accounts are secret and it could be used by all kinds of bad actors. We won't let you have access to the U.S. financial system unless all of these accounts and shell companies have real names and real passports. They can do it right now. They can do it for North Korea. They can do it for Syria. They can do it for every account that's in Grand Cayman, which is where most of the American hedge funds are registered, as if they're really in Grand Cayman. No, it gives them a way to keep everything secret. If they did that, nobody would want a bank account in Grand Cayman if you couldn't move the money into the U.S. And it would finish it. That's what Morgenthau said to me. And he's right. If the U.S. really wanted to end money laundering, it could do it in a heartbeat. But of course, it's used by the tax evaders, by the corporations. It's used by the CIA. When money was sent in the Iran-Contra deal to Iran, it was sent using offshore cutouts. So I think it started, probably some people had good intentions, but it moved to a point where it was really not serious for a stated purpose, and it became a tool for something else.
Lucy, very interesting stuff. Real quick question here, actually, but we've got to go to a break in just a minute. But you brought up Natalie Edwards, again, the whistleblower who in January earlier this year was charged with the release of SARS. If I'm reading this correctly, also, this is according to Wikipedia. I'm actually going to ask you to fact check this for me. Wikipedia is saying the government's decision to charge Edwards is significant, as this appears to be the first criminal case based solely upon an unauthorized disclosure of a SAR. First, is that true? And second, why do you think she was charged? If this was an operation, what do you think happened?
The Justice Department put out a statement on all this, so she was indeed. If she was the first, maybe she was. I'm not aware of others. I think it was probably because it was written about by newspapers, and it really was illegal. You know, maybe at a certain point, if you can let a lot of things go by that are illegal, but if it's so blatant, maybe you can't let everything go by. And they obviously were able to catch her. And so they had to. You know, you can let a lot of things happen, but if it's in your face and it's illegal, you lose all credibility if you don't go after them. But my interest really is, how did she happen to just target those individuals, and isn't that part of the surveillance? Because that is not what has come up in connection with the charging. And then she did plead guilty, and if you plead guilty, you don't go to court and you can't get questions asked about you. So that's I'm sure she made a deal.
That's kind of what I was wondering about the deal aspect, whether it was either her being thrown under the bus or a little bit more likely her just doing that to sort of get by this whole process. In any event, we'll come back with Lucy. We've got to go into a break right now. I want to ask her on the other side of this about the surveillance, about exactly what she's talking about here, how these records, as they're being requested, how this can be used to survey specific entities that you're trying to go after. We're joined by Lucy Commissar, investigative journalist focusing on corporate and financial corruption. We will be back with her in just a minute.
Fault lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune into Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Fault lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan, and our guest for this segment, Lucy Commissar. She's an investigative journalist focusing on corporate and financial corruption. We're talking about BuzzFeed's FinCEN leaks, what the real motivation here is. And Lucy, you're bringing up a very interesting line of thought here, which has to do with surveillance.
There's another point I want to bring in, which is related to this first point, very political. The other political point is more about the William Browder hoax. And that's the story of Parapolichny. There were 8 articles BuzzFeed ran. One of them was not about a bank. It was about a Ukrainian-Russian financier named Parapolichny, who died jogging. And Browder immediately said Putin killed him. So let me tell you about that, because that shows you more about the BuzzFeed political focus on this, which again, it's not about money laundering. So this guy, he dropped dead. He was jogging outside his home in London. Why was he in London? Because he had lost a lot of money for one of his Russian clients who wanted him to pay it back. He got out of town with enough money to set himself down in a very expensive part of town. Also, what he did, obviously needing protection, he went to William Browder and said that he had a lot of financial documents that showed, he gave him the documents. It was from his client, and which obviously not ethical, but this guy wasn't very ethical. And Browder took them to the Swiss authorities and announced, because the accounts were in Switzerland, that this was the money from the $230 million that had been stolen from the Russian treasury, and that his lawyer, Magnitsky, had blown the whistle on. A quick summary, there was a scam involving collusive lawsuits. Browder shell companies pretended they had to pay out their year's profits and get refunds of their taxes. This was done. The accountant was Magnitsky, wasn't a lawyer, and he was named in the trial that sent the deals, the operator of this on behalf of Browder to prison. And Browder would claim that the shells were stolen, but that's not true. So he has been going around the world peddling his Magnitsky $230 million story to anybody who could listen. That's why he wanted Parapolichny's documents. That was in about 2011. The Swiss have never done anything with the documents because they don't prove anything. So, but he died. He was running up the hill, and BuzzFeed wrote that he dropped dead because he was linked to this tax scam and had fled Russia, blowing the whistle on the scam. Well, that's a lie. Then he said, BuzzFeed writes, U.S. intelligence concluded he was likely assassinated on direct orders from Russian President Putin or people close to him. This has never been reported. BuzzFeed has no evidence for this. I would say they've just made it up because, let me give you another Russia connection. There was a company called Financial Bridge, and it was a corrupt company that was involved in people in Russia would sell shares to their shell companies. That's why this was called a bridge, and then turn the rubles into dollars and be able to move their money out of the country and then sell off the shares for dollars. And the Russians suspended Financial Bridge's trading license on suspicion of money laundering. Parapolichny was one of the owners of this. So BuzzFeed is writing that he was assassinated on orders from Putin. Now, why, after Russia suspended the license of his company for moving cash for criminals, would they want to do that? They've already done away with his company. And of course, this is more invention. I've never seen it written anyplace else. So he dropped dead in a heart attack. He was overweight. He was rushing up a hill. People who saw him gasping. So then what happened is there was an inquest in London, and it turned out the inquest was promoted by. Initially, they said he died of natural causes. Browder insisted there had to be an inquest, and a big investigation. And there were political questions. This dragged on for 2 years, during which, by the way, Parapolichny's widow was not able to get life insurance for herself and her 2 children. But finally, they did this, and BuzzFeed says that this was likely. They basically quote Browder without quoting him. He was likely murdered. Well, he wasn't. The autopsy finally said it was totally natural causes. Browder was insisting that there was some kind of a plant poison. There's always some kind of exotic poison. And the authorities did the proper investigation, and there wasn't any plant poison. So that becomes part of just another one of his fake stories. But why is BuzzFeed writing about this? Because BuzzFeed is suggesting that Browder is right, that this guy was killed. By the way, the reason he had been in Paris for a few days, and that's also supposedly part of some suspicious activity. Well, he was meeting his girlfriend, a young, attractive model, in a French hotel. That's why he was in Paris. And they ate very well, but apparently he got sick from food. So he had food poisoning, and maybe that's part of what felled him in London when he returned to London. Now, it's another interesting part. BuzzFeed says that Parapolichny changed himself from a money launderer to a whistleblower. That's a lie. But interesting, Financial Bridge didn't disappear. The Russians had banned it, but it didn't disappear. It found a new life in the criminal underworld. Wait a minute. BuzzFeed is saying that Parapolichny is now not a bad guy money launderer. He's a good guy whistleblower, but his company is now involved in the criminal underworld. It doesn't explain very much about that, but all of that, to me, it connects to, I think, the backstory of the BuzzFeed operation is basically a Russophobic one. If you carefully look at all of the aspects, it's a Russophobic one. And this fake Parapolichny story and by the way, they just wrote it recently. All they had to do is a little bit of research looking at the Reuters article at the time of the inquest. No plant toxins found in stomach of dead Russian whistleblower, UK scientist says. Financial Times, coroner finds wealthy Russian died of natural causes. And Financial Times again, Inquest finds no plant toxins in Russian whistleblower. Of course, he wasn't a whistleblower. They were just picking up on Browder stuff. They got half the story right.
Lucy,
but
is it possible
the media
that BuzzFeed is just lazy? Like,
it could be that it's lazy, but it's really easy if you're writing about paraplegia. Just do a search on the internet, and these articles pop up.
And my question here is, I mean, even if BuzzFeed's lazy, take that as granted. Who are they getting this information from? Who is pushing this?
Right.
They're getting it from Browder.
It's also significant. You brought this up, and we kind of flew right by it. It's significant that BuzzFeed is turning on Christopher Steele. Again, Chris Steele, the author of the Steele dossier, what's become known as the Steele dossier over the years, originally heralded by the left, by the establishment against Trump. Again, it would have been crazy to say that he was a pro-Russian asset at that point, but it seems like now that report has been absolutely debunked and time has worn on, it makes sense for them to turn on that dime. Could you go into that a little bit more, Lucy? What's the connection with Steele? How does he tie into this?
Well, on this story, he's not talked about at all. It comes up in Natalie Edwards' information because he's one of the people, and those are the older articles, which I didn't review for this broadcast. Those are the older articles, and it's a good idea to go back and look at what was said then. These are only about SARS going through banks, and mostly they were the big stories were about Deutsche Bank and HSBC and a Russian bank called VEB, not the American banks. The American banks were mentioned in passing, but basically protected from any clear focus. And one curious thing, they attacked VEB, which is a state-owned Russian bank, and they say it continues to operate in the U.S. Now, we know that the Treasury sanctions banks and anything Russian at the drop of a hat. Are they protecting a Russian bank? And then it is said that money from a looted Russian bank where Vladimir Putin's cousin sat on the board was filtered into the network. So it's a state bank, and a cousin may be on it, but Putin could have put his closer relatives on it. Putin does not monitor his cousin. He has said that, but there is no evidence that anything. The other part of all of this, by the way, is money laundering has to be based on money that comes from a crime. It's not just money was sent from this place to another place. A lot of that money, by the way, is capital flight. Some of it's just totally legitimate, paying for things. We have international commerce. You have to move money to pay for things that you're getting in another place, in another country. There's also capital flight. Money laundering is only if you can show that the money came from crime or corruption. In none of it is it shown that the money that is these suspicious activity reports would have to be linked to a crime or corruption to show that they were reports of money laundering. That does not exist. And basically what happens is you throw out a lot of information, a lot of names, this bank, this many of that, but you have no evidence that there is anything wrong with it. And people get so dizzy sometimes in looking at that, they say, wait a minute, so what that there was money moved through this bank and that bank? This is part of international commerce. And that, that is really one of the problems of not just this BuzzFeed, but in general, the media, the Western media, which throws out charges with no evidence. So I know that now we know it's really clear that the story of this dossier the Steele dossier is fake. By the way, it's very interesting to go back and look at the book that Len Simpson wrote last year, and it's all about Steele. Steele is the hero of the book. I wonder if he's going to do a revised copy.
Lucy, we've got to come back and talk about that more. Lucy Commissar, thank you for joining us. She's an investigative journalist focusing on corporate and financial corruption. By the way, you should follow her on Twitter at Lucy Commissar. That's Commissar with a K. And check out her articles at thecommissarscoop.com. You've been listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. Thank you to engineer Andre. Thank you to our producer Raheem. And thank you to my co-host, Jamarl Thomas. Be back tomorrow. Thanks, folks.
All right, guys, that is the end of the show. I want to thank all of you for joining us. You will see this face in probably 15, 20 minutes. I'm going to be doing shows today. And thank you guys for joining us. Fault Lines, Thomas and Stranahan. All right, guys, we will see you on this show tomorrow at 7 in the morning. But you'll see me later today. Thanks all.